"Mom, Dad, I'm home." A cheerful voice echoed from the hallway. Valerie had always loved loudly announcing her comeback since childhood. Karen smiled, but tears welled up in her eyes. Valerie would never be the 10-year-old girl who ran into the apartment shouting, "I'm here, feed the hungry child." Valerie was already 23. Just think about it. In a month, she would be getting married. And then, who knows, maybe soon Karen would become a grandmother. A grandmother. She didn't feel old. It seemed like just yesterday she was also 23, just like Valerie now. It felt like yesterday when Karen moved to this city with her little girl. "Come on, don't cry," Lawrence demanded. "Karen, what's wrong?" Karen wept at her ease with the back of her hand. She hadn't even noticed she was on the verge of tears. "I'm fine," she muttered to her husband sitting across from her. "I'm not crying." "Uh-huh, I can see," Lawrence said, smiling affectionately. "Don't worry, Mom. Everything will be fine with Valerie." "Oh, leave me alone." Karen put the spoon down next to her plate and nervously adjusted her hair. "You wouldn't understand anyway. My daughter is getting married." "Mom, what's for lunch?" Valerie had already washed her hands and darted into the kitchen. She flopped onto a chair and stared at her mom. "I'm starving," she exclaimed. "Serve yourself, dear." Karen smiled. "Everything's ready on the stove." "If I'm not fed in this house, what's the point?" Valerie whined. "I have to do everything myself." "Oh, sit tight, child. I'll get everything for you," Lawrence sighed. "How did it go?" Valerie stretched. "We had a good time. The guy is really nice. He understood what we want right away." "What do you want, dear?" Karen asked. Valerie smiled dreamily. "We want a fairy tale. Ian came up with a themed wedding. I want everyone to wear masks." "Oh, then I call dibs on being Batman," Lawrence said. "Is that okay?" "Dad, no way, of course not." Valerie frowned. "Why Batman? I want the wedding to be like Cinderella's fairy tale. Can you imagine? I'll be the princess, and Mom will be the kind fairy godmother." "Why not the queen?" Karen glanced at her daughter. "So am I the fairy then? A fairy should be young and beautiful." "Well, you are young and beautiful," Valerie and Lawrence chorused in response. Then they exchanged looks and laughed. "So it's settled then. There will be a fairy tale ball, no silly contests, and I'll definitely lose a shoe," Valerie declared. "So that means there will be a ball, right?" her dad asked. "And what will I be?" "Daddy, you'll be the king," Valerie promised, and Lawrence puffed up proudly. "Now, that's the right decision." Karen looked at her husband and daughter tenderly. She was lucky. Lawrence wasn't Valerie's biological father, but he adored her just the same, and she reciprocated. Over the years, they seemed to have become more like each other. Karen's second daughter, Billy, born from Lawrence, seemed to resemble him even less than Valerie. They had the same look in their eyes, furrowed brows, and even common phrases. "Valerie, will you wash the dishes?" Karen asked. "I'm just terribly exhausted." "Oh, here we go. Even on the eve of your wedding, you're ready to use me for your own purposes," the girl sighed. "Mom, how long will this go on?" "I'll do it," Lawrence defended his daughter. "Valerie, you can rest. By my royal decree, so to speak." "All right then, I'll rest too." Karen got up from the table and smiled at her husband and daughter. Today has been such a hectic day. Leaving Valerie and Lawrence in the kitchen, Karen headed to the shower. She was really exhausted. Today she had to conduct 4 workshops. It was even hard for her to speak, let alone stand on her feet. She just wanted to shower and collapse into bed, sleeping until morning. It's good that Billy was still at summer camp. She would definitely not give her any rest. Billy was already 12, but she demanded a lot of maternal attention, as if she had just turned 3 again. Whether it was her teenage crisis or just her character, Karen wasn't sure. She loved her daughter, but sometimes she wanted a break from her and some time alone. Fortunately, Lawrence took the brunt of it. He talked to Billy, played some games with her on the console, helped her with her homework while Karen rested. Before heading to the shower, she decided to check the hallway. Valerie had a habit of tossing things without looking, and it couldn't be unlearned. That's just how she'd always been. Even Grandma Jenna couldn't do anything about it, and she was a terrible neat freak. And here it was now, just as expected. Bag on the floor. Valeri had missed the coat rack again. And she's already 23, and the shoes were right in the center of the rug. Poor Ian. How will he put up with this? Karen chuckled. But sometimes she genuinely felt sorry for the future spouse of her eldest daughter. But Ian was a soft and yielding person. Perhaps that's exactly what Valeri needed. Karen hung the bag on the rack, neatly placed her daughter's shoes on the shelf, and decided to check the table. Oh, Valerie! The lipstick was left open since the morning, and somehow the cologne ended up on the bedside table. Karen's attention was drawn to a small, light gray business card with black embossing. Christopher Wood, wedding and anniversary organizer, host. Karen felt her heart skip a beat. Christopher Wood. It seemed like she had long forgotten that name, crumpled it between her palms, and scattered it to the wind. Thrown out of her heart, like throwing out old useless junk from the house. Or not. She returned to the kitchen. Valeri was washing the dishes. Lawrence stood next to her, a towel draped over his shoulder. Could you take the crystal salad bowls instead of the shoes? He joked. I'll think about it. Valeri nodded. Dad, do they have salad bowls in size 38? Valeri, can you tell me what this host of yours looks like? Karen asked her daughter. Valerie looked at her mom and the smile vanished from her face. What? Is something wrong? Karen forced a smile. No, it's just that it seems we went to school together, Valeri replied. Valeri finished washing the last plate and handed it to Lawrence. He too was looking at his wife with a mixture of fear and surprise. Perhaps Karen shouldn't have started this conversation. She was never good at hiding her emotions. Lawrence even liked that about her. He said it was convenient when everything was written on your spouse's face. No secrets. Valeri shrugged. So, Mom, what about him? How did he look? Dark, tall guy, dressed fancy, like in an Armani jacket, but from the year before last. Karen smiled, this time genuinely. Valeri studied to be a fashion designer, so she remembered people not by their faces but by their clothes. And she always noticed brands. She could overlook a scar on half of someone's face or huge glasses on their nose. But whether a person's bag was fake or their skirt was last year's collection, she noticed right away. Well, why does it matter, Mom? Valeri asked. Do you know him? No, probably not, just a familiar name. My mistake. Karen waved it off. Okay, Valeri brightened, kissed her dad on the cheek, then walked up to her mom, hugged her shoulders and said, I'm going to look through dress catalogs. The wedding is coming soon, and I still don't have a dress. The girl went to her room. Karen felt even heavier. Her room. Soon Valeri would move to a new apartment with her husband, which Ian got as a gift from his father. Valeri would take her things, her toys, which still lay on the bed, her collection of fashion magazines that she had been collecting since her teenage years. Feeling blue? Lawrence took his wife's hand and kissed her on the forehead. Yeah, a little, she sighed. It feels like just yesterday I took her to first grade, and now she's getting married. Can you believe how time flies? Blink again and Billy will be here with her groom, just like that. Lawrence lifted Karen's face with his index finger. Let's not be sad. Want to have another one? Another what? Karen didn't understand. A child. You're still young, 43 years old. You'll distract yourself. Oh, come on, Karen jokingly slapped her husband's shoulder. Lawrence, why do we need that? And why not? Lawrence said. I'm still a man in his prime. Yeah, and I'm a woman on the brink of old age. Karen raised herself on tiptoes and kissed her husband on the cheek. Okay, I'm going to take a shower. And only in the shower did the woman let her tears flow. Christopher. So many years had passed, but it still hurt, although no one was to blame. Neither him nor her, it just happened. And her life turned out well. There was nothing to complain about. Karen sometimes wondered, what if everything had been different? If Christopher Wood hadn't been in her life, there wouldn't have been Lawrence, Valeri, Billy, or Jenna. Maybe fate threw him to her for a reason. Like, here, have a test. If you pass, you'll get a gift, many gifts. And if you don't pass, blame yourself. And apparently Karen passed the test and quite well. But why did it hurt so much now? No, it wasn't him. Just a namesake. Why not? It's not such a rare name. Karen sat in the bath examining her fingertips. She remembered. 24 years ago. Karen, how long will you keep doing this? Mom peeked into her room and frowned. Maybe it's enough playing the guitar? Who's going to the store? Let Jody go, Karen grumbled. I'm tired. Tired? Mom entered the room and stood beside her daughter, who was sitting on the couch. Tired of what? There were a lot of classes at college. Karen carefully put the guitar aside. Plus, practice. But everyone went to school and didn't get tired. Mom glanced at the guitar as if it were an enemy. But Jody can go, Mom. Karen looked at the woman thoughtfully. I'm really tired and didn't sleep well. But you have energy for that. Mom looked at the guitar again. Yeah, I do, Karen replied. So get up and go to the store and then peel and boil potatoes. Dad will be home soon. Dinner needs to be prepared. Mom crossed her arms over her chest. Karen, seriously, who's going to marry someone like you? Karen just nodded in response. Arguing with her mother when she starts talking about marriage is pointless. Marrying off both daughters is a sacred duty for the mother, and her father just goes along with it. All that's left is to resign herself to it. All right, I'll go, Mom. Do you have a list? Karen asked. A list, grumbled her mom. If you were a normal girl, you'd know what to buy. So remember, potatoes, mayonnaise, bread, only fresh. Dad only eats fresh, and that's all. Yeah, I know, Karen said, pulling a sweater over her t-shirt. And you're going like this? Her mom asked, surprised. What's wrong with that? What's the big deal? In that, daughter? My goodness, at least pay attention to your appearance. You're walking around like in a sack with your hair in a ponytail, no makeup. Here, put on some lipstick to brighten up, her mom said. I don't want to, Karen smiled. Who do I need to impress? Who do you need to impress? My goodness, a woman should just take care of herself, you understand? Her mom raised her index finger in the air, apparently trying to give her words more weight. Why does your sister Jody take care of herself and you don't? I do take care of myself, Karen mocked her mom. See, my sweater is clean. The woman waved her hand tiredly as if to say, You're hopeless, what can I do? And Karen made a playful curtsy and headed to the store. It's frustrating that her mom and dad don't understand her passion for music. Music is Karen's life. She started guitar lessons on her own, but her mom thinks it's all nonsense. Karen's parents were people of traditional views. They lived by simple commandments. The man is the provider, and the woman is the keeper of the home. They said it was the way things were supposed to be, and there was no need to change this established system. If people had done it for thousands of years before us, then that's how it should be. This led to other rules accepted in their family. A girl should take care of herself, be clean and neat. It was preferable to wear dresses and skirts. Karen ignored the last rule, which wasn't easy. Her mom would never approve of buying jeans. Karen had to start earning her own money. She washed dishes in a small cafe and spent the money she earned on pants, t-shirts, and sweaters from thrift stores. There were many arguments when Karen started dressing the way she wanted. But her mom and dad eventually accepted it, mutually deciding that it was just a passing phase that would soon pass from Karen's head. But the passing phase didn't pass. Karen's parents accepted the absence of feminine clothing in Karen's wardrobe, but they never managed to accept that she loved music. Her father even threatened to throw away the guitar, but he didn't, thankfully. Karen tried not to give him any reason to carry out this threat. She treasured her guitar. She saved up for it for a long time, choosing it as meticulously as a bride chooses a wedding dress. Karen envied her older sister Jody. She easily followed the family rules, wore dresses, looked neat. Jody was a year older than Karen and was finishing her studies at a pedagogical institute where she was studying to be a speech therapist. The profession was chosen at a family council. The parents stated that it was an ideal job, although Jody had initially planned to go into medicine. Medicine! Her mom shouted so loudly that the chandelier on the ceiling rattled. There's so much there. You'll see all sorts of things. Can you imagine you come home and you smell like all of that? What will your husband say? Yes, and the shifts around the clock, her dad chimed in. What about kids? What about cooking dinner for your husband? No, a speech therapist is a good profession. They pay a lot. and Jody gave up her dreams of medicine and obediently enrolled in a pedagogical institute. Meanwhile, Karen went to college to study culinary arts. She loved cooking, so she had no doubt about her choice. Of course, she would have preferred a conservatory, but who would take her there without a music school? And her parents would never let her go to the big city from their small village. Her mom was even pleased. Culinary arts were the most fitting occupation for a girl. With such a diploma, it would be much easier to find a good husband. In the store, Karen bought everything her mom asked for, but on the way back, she ran into Jody, who was walking arm in arm with David, her boyfriend. David's presence was carefully hidden from their parents. They believed that as long as Jody hadn't finished her studies, she couldn't think about boys and what comes with them. Even kisses were forbidden, let alone anything more. But Karen knew for sure that Jody and David had long had a mature relationship, and she was afraid to even imagine what would happen if their parents found out. "Hi." Karen smiled at her sister. "How's school?" "The same." Jody just waved her hand tiredly. "I'll never pass this exam." "You will," David declared, a short, fair-haired guy in a plaid shirt. "I believe in you." "And what about you, Karen?" "Fine," Karen replied, shifting her bag from one hand to the other. "Just waiting for all of this to be over, so I can leave." "Are you going to New York or something?" David asked. "Maybe there too," Karen smirked. "I'll become a rock star." "And then Dad will have a heart attack," Jody's older sister laughed. "He says all musicians are alcoholics." "People often can't understand each other," Karen sighed. "That's why all these misunderstandings happen. They're not all alcoholics." "All right, David, see you later before the parents see us from the window." Jody kissed the guy on the cheek. He hugged her goodbye, whispered something in her ear, and went to the bus stop. Jody watched him go. "Ugh, when will he finally propose to me, huh?" the older sister said sadly. "He will," Karen assured her. "Jody, it's too early. He's still in school himself." "I just want to get out of this madhouse already," her sister replied angrily. "We live like in a prison. I dream of getting a haircut. I'm tired of this braid." Karen looked at her sister. Jody was tall, taking after their father, and she had an inexplicable but obvious quality of appearance, what they call stature. Jody pulled her thick blonde braid as if trying to tear it off, but the braid didn't budge. "Yeah, I understand you, sis. I cut my hair once and Dad didn't talk to me for a month," Karen remembered. "And Mom was crying. I remember too." Jody shook her head. "Sometimes I want to do what Aunt Ashley did." "Don't say that in front of Mom," Karen widened her eyes, "or it'll start all over again." Aunt Ashley was considered the anti-hero in the family, an example of how not to live. She was their mother's sister, Karen's and Jody's. At 20, Aunt Ashley ran away from the village to the city, where she got married and had 3 children. The marriage fell apart. Mom considered all of this an irredeemable shame and a stigma for the rest of her life. Aunt Ashley worked as a taxi driver, which was a terrible disgrace according to Dad already. He categorized professions as male or female. Of course, being a taxi driver was a male job. Dad often hinted that Aunt Ashley not only worked as a taxi driver, but also provided other services, and overall, she fell as low as possible. Finally, the sisters arrived home. Mom scolded Karen for taking too long at the store and asked, "Do you have a boyfriend? Were you kissing him, perhaps?" "No, there's no boyfriend," Jody rushed to defend her sister. "We were just walking slowly, strolling, and I met Karen at the store, that's all." "All right," nodded Mom. "Karen, go peel the potatoes." Karen obediently peeled the potatoes and even made mashed potatoes. She finished just in time for her father's return. He, as usual, spent a long time in the hallway, then changed into his home pants and t-shirt. By that time, the table should have been set. If not, there would be a scandal, like a simple woman's task, and she can't even do that. But fortunately, dinner was ready and even served. Father sat down at his chair at the head of the table. Mom settled opposite him. "Chunks," observed Dad, tasting the mashed potatoes. "So, Karen, what's this all about?" Mom frowned. "Where are you learning? You should know how to cook." Culinary. Under the table, Jody stroked Karen's knee, trying to support and warn her at the same time. Don't react. Stay calm. Karen mumbled, Sorry, I'm tired, didn't notice. But you should notice, sighed Dad. It seemed like his thick mustache even rose a bit in annoyance. You're a woman. You should know how to do these things. You're already old enough and still haven't learned. After dinner, it was tea time. Jody collected the empty plates, put them in the sink, and poured tea. Karen, what do you think about your future? Unexpectedly asked her father. Nothing yet, Karen lied. Need to finish studying first. Nah. But she couldn't tell him that she planned to go to the city and make a living with music. Well, you could write song lyrics and sell them for big money. Karen, I've been thinking I have a guy in mind. Father smiled at his youngest daughter, as if expecting her to be delighted. I thought you should marry him. What? Karen almost choked on her tea. What do you mean? He's a friend's son. We served together in the army. He's like a brother to me, just came back recently. Lived in another city. His name is Dominic. Maybe you remember? Lucy, I told you about him. Mom nodded. Oh yes, I remember Gerald. Wow, he's back. We talked on the phone a couple of months ago, then met, then talked, continued Dad. His son is a good boy. I vouch for him. He's the kind of guy I want to see as a future son-in-law. So we thought we could make the families closer. Wait a minute, why not Jody, for example? Karen blurted out. Jody nudged her under the table. Karen yelped and gave her older sister a disapproving look. But the parents paid no attention to this small incident. Mom looked at Dad and smiled, clearly pleased with his words. Well, I showed him your photos, shrugged Dad. He liked Karen, said he loves redheads. I'll dye my hair, promised Karen. Don't even try, there will be no dyed hair in this house, Dad warned. Dad, do you even hear yourself? Karen protested. We're not in the 18th century to arrange these kinds of arranged marriages. Your parents only wish you well, you know, Mom exclaimed. Where did you get this idea that you have to do everything against us, huh? Ridiculous, muttered Karen, barely able to contain her indignation. She wanted to escape from home, or better yet, from the village. It's not ridiculous, not at all. Karen, I want you two to meet. Russell is a good guy, hard-working, served in the army. You won't find anyone better, insisted Dad. I won't meet him, Karen stubbornly replied to her father. No, you will. The man slammed the spoon on the table. The girl flinched in fear. They'll come to visit us tomorrow, we'll marry you off, and then it will be Jody's turn, he continued. Jody paled slightly. Oh yes, their father definitely wouldn't approve of David. Poor student who hadn't even served in the army and had no intention to. David was a staunch pacifist. And his profession wasn't manly either. He was an elementary school teacher. Thanks for dinner, I'm going to bed. Karen struggled to maintain composure as she got up from the table. Get some rest, Dad nodded. Tomorrow at 12, Dominic and his son Russell will come over. I hope you'll behave properly. In her room, Karen collapsed on the couch and buried her face in the pillow. Lord, this was like a bad dream. Did Dad really think this was a good idea? Although their parents did meet like this, didn't they? Karen barely remembered her grandfather. He passed away when she was very young. But according to her father's stories, he was a strict man who loved rules and order above all else. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the same time. If lunch wasn't on the table by 2 o'clock, Grandma faced a terrible scandal. It was customary to come to the table in decent clothing, no bathrobes or saggy pants. Perfect order should reign at home. Dad proudly recounted how Grandpa checked the quality of cleaning. He wore white gloves and ran his finger along the shelves, windowsills, and tables. If dust was found, Grandma had to start a thorough cleaning immediately. And to Dad, such a life seemed to be the only right one. Grandpa also found a wife for his son, Karen's mother, a decent girl from a good family who lived nearby, and he gave him an ultimatum. Either marry her as soon as you return from the army, or you're no longer my son. Naturally, Gerald chose marriage. The mother easily fit into the rules of her new family. Her duty was the hearth. The husband's task was to bring the mammoth to this hearth. That's how it should be. That's how one should live. And now they found a suitable husband for Karen too. What if she refuses? Will they kick her out of the house? Or not kick her out but make her life unbearable? The door creaked quietly open. Jody, her older sister, entered the room. She sat on the edge of the couch and gently patted Karen's shoulder. "What's wrong with you?" "What?" Karen turned sharply to her sister, tears streaming down her face. "Didn't you hear what he came up with? He decided to marry me off to this Russell, the decent guy." "So what? How will he force you? He won't drag you to the wedding." "Do you not know Dad, Jody? He'll tie me up, gag me, and send me off to a happy married life." Karen sat down and hugged her knees with her hands. "And what am I supposed to do?" "Don't be afraid. You'll meet this Russell and you'll forget about him. Dad still loves you. He won't force you," Jody reassured her. Karen wanted to believe it, but the situation was driving her crazy. They decided to marry her off, just like that. No one cared about her life plans, her dreams, her desires. Dad made the decision. Let him marry Russell himself if he's such a good guy. "Let's go to bed." Jody hugged Karen tightly, so tight that it took her breath away. "We'll laugh about all this later, I promise you." The next day at exactly noon, Russell and Dominic stood at their apartment door. Dominic was a tall man with gray hair and a seemingly carved from stone emotionless face. His son, Russell, was a spitting image of his father, except his hair wasn't gray. Both were dressed in strict gray suits, jackets, ties, crisp white shirts, as if they were going to get married right then and there. Karen's mother made her wear a dress, a long light blue one with a full skirt. Karen couldn't stand that dress, but she didn't have the strength or the mood to argue. Everyone settled in the living room around the table. Karen felt terrible and wished more than anything to be anywhere else. Meanwhile, her mother was in a great mood, joking around, pouring tea for the guests, and constantly pushing a plate of pie towards Russell. "Russell, how's work?" her father asked. "Good," Russell nodded. "I work at an auto repair shop. They pay well, can't complain." "Yes, they'll pay even more," Dominic declared. He looked so important, as if he were at a royal reception. "By the way, my son Russell plans to open his own auto repair shop. You know, people have a lot of cars, so we decided there won't be any shortage of money." Father looked meaningfully at Karen. She snorted and buried her nose in her cup. "That's right," Mother smiled. "That's the way it should be. There will always be work." "But there are gynecologists, for example. They won't be out of work either. People always—" "Karen," Lucy interrupted her daughter. "Not at the table, dear." "What's wrong with that?" Karen feigned surprise. "I just think there are many necessary and important professions in this world. Doctors are one example." Dominic shot Karen a surprised look. "Doctor, that's an ungrateful job and they don't get paid much. You made the right choice too. Culinary arts? You can cook for your husband at home." Yes, Karen loves to cook for us," Mother stated. Jody struggled to hold back a smile. The older sister knew that Karen hated cooking. If it were up to her, she'd survive on pizza and scrambled eggs. "Oh, that's good," Dominic nodded. "That's the best profession for a woman. You know, I even think a woman should stay at home. After all, men are created to work and achieve something. It's easier for us. And women who climb the career ladder, excuse me, they're not women anymore, but not quite men either." "Then who are they, sorry?" Karen asked. "Creatures of indefinite gender," the guest replied. Apparently, he didn't notice the sarcasm in Karen's voice. "Russell's mother worked, yes, I allowed it. And then she met someone else at work. And what was left for me to do? I had to take the child and raise her myself. Who can such a mother raise?" Karen looked at Russell. It seemed like her father's words didn't evoke any emotions in him. She felt uncomfortable. And her father was going to marry her off to such a family, and he meant it literally. He firmly believed that a girl, upon marriage, should go to her husband's family. That's the tradition. Exactly, Lucy agreed. A woman's fate is the home. That's how we raise our daughters. From childhood, we teach them to clean, iron, cook. Karen didn't listen to her mother. She knew what she would say, how she and Jody were taught to embroider. Karen couldn't stand embroidering, and Jody secretly finished her embroideries. Mother would also inevitably talk about how Karen loves to tidy up the apartment. She just enjoys wiping dust or vacuuming the carpet. And how's she cooking? Russell nodded and smiled. Dominic, too, looked at Karen with a satisfied expression, as if he was being offered a great deal, ready to pull out his wallet, but still wanted to listen to the consultant's words once more to make sure he hadn't made a mistake in his choice. Lunch came to an end. "Karen, would you like to take a walk with Russell?" asked Mom. "Show him around?" "Show him the playground?" replied Karen. "We have one." "Karen," her father barked. "Take a walk in the park. We'll stay here and chat." "Jody, will you come with us?" Karen asked hopefully. Jody nodded, but Mom took her hand. No, Jody will stay here with me. She'll help with the dishes. Go, Karen." Russell wiped his mouth with a napkin and stood up. "I'd be happy to take a stroll." Karen had no choice. She had to take Russell for a walk, whom her father apparently considered her future husband. They stepped outside. Russell was silent. Karen firmly decided not to say a word to him on her own initiative. They walked silently towards the park. Locally, this area was called the park, but in reality, it was an alley lined with trees. "You're a nice girl," Russell said when they reached the park. "Thank you," Karen replied. She didn't want to continue the conversation. "What are your hobbies?" he asked. "Music," Karen smiled. "I sing, compose, play the guitar." "I don't like music," he said. "It distracts. It's all pointless. Why play the guitar when you can read something or work?" "Well then don't play," Karen suggested. "I happen to like it." "All right, but what if your husband doesn't approve of your hobby?" "Well then that's his problem, that's all," Karen replied. Russell smiled in response. "Well listen, this is important. It shouldn't be like that in a family. You've heard, right? The woman is the neck, but the man is still the head. If the head is smart, it won't press on the neck too hard, or it might break," Karen replied. Russell frowned. "I was told you were a smart, sensible girl." "They lied to you," Karen snarled. "It's okay," Russell tried to take her hand. "It'll pass with time, and it's even more interesting that way." Karen withdrew her hand. "I'm sorry, we're not familiar enough to hold hands," she said. "Touch me not," he shook his head. "That's not bad either. Nowadays, girls are so indiscriminate. They're ready to jump into bed on the first date. Of course, it's foolish to marry someone like that. Your sister, she's not like that, though." "What's wrong with my sister?" Karen asked, feeling alarmed. "Well, we have mutual acquaintances. I've done some research. She changes boyfriends every week, hides them from her parents. If your father finds out, I can't imagine what will happen." "Do you think he should know?" he asked casually. "Are you trying to scare me?" exclaimed Karen. "No, not at all," Russell calmly replied. "You come from a good family. I like you. And your father wants us to get married. I don't see the point in arguing with his decision. Your parents seem fine with it too. But if you start resisting, then yes, your mother and father will learn something unpleasant about Jody. I don't think they'd be happy about it." Suddenly, Karen felt like she was talking to someone who had lost their mind. "Are you threatening me, saying you'll tell my parents about Jody's boyfriend?" "I'm not threatening you, just doing what I think is necessary. All right, let's not dwell on this. We didn't come here to argue," Russell said. Karen decided not to object. It would all be over soon, and she would forget Russell like a bad dream. Meanwhile, Russell continued to expound on what his family should be like. Correct, adhering to all possible traditions. "And these feminists," Russell said. "Someone started feeding all this to women. That's why they become like my mom. And in general, I've been burned many times. You see, girls nowadays are different, not like before." Finally, Russell had had enough of walking. They returned home, where they were greeted by a radiant Lucy. Karen glanced at her mother. "Dominic went home. Dad went to see him off, and how about you kids?" "Great," Russell smiled. "Karen is a very, very interesting girl." Finally, Russell left as well. Karen went to the kitchen to have some tea and be alone, but she couldn't. "So, is he a good boy?" asked the mother. "Awful," Karen admitted. "Boring. He doesn't like music. Thinks a woman's place is in the kitchen. What's that about?" "Silly girl," Lucy shook her head. He's right, dear. That's how we live. That's how our parents lived. And that's how you'll live. Karen didn't argue, but she felt disgusted inside. She understood that her father had made his decision, and he wasn't going to back down. Before bed, she told her sister Jody about Russell knowing about her personal life. "And what?" Jody asked challengingly. "I'll finish college soon and leave with David from here. I'm not going to live by their rules, you understand?" "Yeah, I get it. There will be a scandal, though. You know, Dad," Karen said. "So what? Karen, we're adults. Wake up, it's time to stop living by their rules." The next day, Karen's father decided it was time for a heart-to-heart. Predictably, it ended in a shouting match. "Karen, he's willing to overlook your flaws, to tolerate your quirks. I've sung your praises to him. They're a wonderful family." "And if I refuse, Dad?" "Then you're no daughter of mine," her father declared. "It's Russell or the highway. I've given my word to Dominic, you understand?" Karen spent the day in tears. The thought of being disowned by her parents was all too real. She knew them well and loved them dearly, fearing their loss more than anything. But Russell, as a husband, they were completely incompatible, a fact Karen was aware of. Surely there were plenty of women who would dream of such a match. Why was her father so adamant that she had to marry Russell? In the days that followed, her parents seemed to forget the incident. Karen went to college, returned home, played her guitar, and tried to write songs. Tried, because it seemed her muse had abandoned her for good. She just strummed chords and hummed aimlessly. Jody was visibly upset. Karen knew she was terrified their father would find out about David. He believed his daughters should remain pure until marriage, their virginity a precious gift for their husband. Any deviation meant disgrace. A week went by. Coming home as usual, Karen went to her room. Her guitar was missing. She couldn't believe her eyes. Maybe she'd placed it somewhere else. But no, it was gone, not in the closet or under the bed. "Could you run to the store?" Her mom popped her head in. "We're out of bread again and your father won't eat without it." "Mom, where's my guitar?" Karen asked. "Your father took it." Lucy shrugged indifferently. "You should be focusing on your wedding. We're thinking spring, April. It's warm and not as busy as summer. We'll easily pick a venue." "Where did he take it?" Karen's voice quivered. "What do you mean, took?" "Threw it out." Her mother spread her hands and smiled. "Honey, it's time to let go of these childish things." "Mom." Karen collapsed on the couch, tears streaming down her face. "How could you, Mom? I saved up for it." Her mother came over and stroked her head. "Dear, don't cry. You'll get married, have children, and all this will be a distant memory. Children are the meaning of life, not your guitar or studies. When will you and Jody realize that?" "Never," Karen exclaimed. "Mom, I don't want to understand that." She sprung up and dashed into the corridor. Her mother tried to stop her, grabbing her by the arms, but Karen didn't care. Tears streamed down her cheeks. A lump in her throat stopped her from screaming. She ran out into the street, forgetting to throw on a jacket. A cool wind blew, but Karen didn't mind. Just in case, she went as far as the dump. The guitar wasn't there. Surely her father knew Karen would try to find it. What was this? The Middle Ages? And her father, like some lord, deciding whom she should marry just because the guy was his friend's son. The girl decided to wander aimlessly. She didn't want to go home. Maybe she should really drop out and move to the city. She'd manage without her parents' blessing. What now? Then it began to rain. Karen sat down on a bench at a covered bus stop and curled up into a ball. She sat there for a long time, almost an hour. Buses came and went. People hurried home. Women with shopping bags, men with briefcases, children coming from school. Everyone rushing somewhere to someone. And Karen? She had nowhere to rush to. Home? Only Jody understood her there. Only her sister cared. And her parents? They dreamed of marrying her off to that awful Russell. "Miss, are you all right?" Karen looked up to see a handsome guy dressed in a bright blue sweater and a red jacket. The color combination struck her as odd, dressed like a parrot. "It's nothing," Karen sniffed, "just in a bad mood." "Maybe I can cheer you up?" The guy plopped down next to her on the bench and stretched out his hand. "Christopher." "Karen," she introduced herself. "No, I doubt you can help me, Christopher." "Want to bet I can?" He winked. "Let's try." "I don't want to try anything." Karen turned away. "What do you even want?" "Nothing." Christopher spread his hands. "Just can't stand to see a young, beautiful lady in distress. Can't leave you in trouble." "You can," Karen shrugged. "Just go where you were headed. You'll be fine." No, I insist." He stood up and offered her his hand. "Come on, Karen. It'll be fun." "Where?" She squinted. "To the theater. We have a performance today. I'll take you backstage." "We? Performance? Who's we?" "I'll tell you on the way." Christopher smiled warmly. "Come on, I can see you desperately need a distraction." Without fully understanding why, Karen got up and followed Christopher. It turned out he had graduated from circus school 2 years ago. "So I'm a professional clown," he explained. "I know women think all men are somewhat clowns, but I actually have a diploma to prove it." "Wow," Karen smiled. "That sounds interesting." "You have no idea," he nodded. "The footlights, the laughter, makeup that you can't wash off. We have a show today. I'll entertain you during the intermissions and even juggle oranges." Suddenly, Karen realized she really wanted to go to the circus. Juggling oranges? Imagine that. And Christopher seemed endlessly kind and understanding. Can a clown ever be mean? Of course not. They reached a small theater. The lobby was crowded with women with children, teenagers, and fathers. "Wait here," Christopher winked at Karen. "Just 5 minutes, don't go anywhere." He disappeared into the crowd. Karen figured she'd never see him again. The guy probably made a joke and she fell for it. However, Christopher came back and handed her a ticket. "Here, take this, front row. Find your seat. I've got to go." Karen obediently went to the auditorium. Soon the lights dimmed and the show began. Trained dogs, a juggler, tightrope walkers. Karen felt lighter and lighter. It was as if she had returned to her childhood, laughing sincerely and clapping her hands. If only she had some money, she would have bought an ice cream during the intermission. Finally, the clown appeared. Karen recognized Christopher immediately, despite the makeup. He cartwheeled across the arena, then pulled oranges out of the wide pockets of his trousers and started tossing them into the air, occasionally dropping them and amusingly kicking them back into his hands with the tip of his enormous shoe. The children were utterly delighted. Karen laughed like a child, forgetting about her parents and Russell. After the show, she went to the cloakroom. The girl was in great spirits. She didn't want to think about what her parents would say, but as usual, they would yell at her. Her father would accuse her of wandering around with who knows who, risking her maiden honor. And her mother would stand by him, nodding along to every word. She was so tired of it all. On the stairs, Karen was caught up by Christopher. His face still bore traces of makeup. He must have been in a hurry when washing up. "So, how was it?" he asked. "I liked it," she honestly replied. "Liked it a lot." "How about I walk you home?" he suddenly offered. "Do you live far?" "No, not far," Karen smiled. "Let's go." She took to him, almost immediately. And now, after seeing Christopher's performance, she liked him even more. He was nothing like that obnoxious Russell. Cheerful, witty, easy to talk to. And Christopher had such an unusual profession, a life on the road, romantic. Karen herself would have liked to live like that, but her parents would hardly approve. The more she talked to Christopher, the less she wanted to think about her mom and dad. It seemed like she had never met anyone like him before. Extraordinary, not like everyone else. She told him about her passion for music. "Oh wow, that's awesome," the guy exclaimed. "Will you play something?" "No, I'm too shy," Karen blushed. "Just silly songs." "Listen, I'm a clown and I love silly songs." He gently took her hand, and Karen decided not to stop him. It seemed like she was holding hands with a guy for the first time in her life. What would her father say about that? Probably he'd have a heart attack. It took them almost an hour to reach her home. They took a few laps, went to a store, bought soda and 2 hot dogs, and talked. They talked and talked and talked. "Shall we meet again tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," Karen nodded. "Okay, then at 7 near the theater." Christopher leaned in and kissed the girl on the cheek. "You'll recognize me by the clown nose." At home, Karen faced a scandal. Her father yelled, called her names, threatened with all sorts of punishments. Karen lied, saying she was just walking alone. So that it doesn't happen again, her father said. If it does, you'll stay on the streets. But Karen didn't care. Anywhere was better than staying in this crazy house. She didn't tell Jody about Christopher either. She might let it slip accidentally. Let it be her little secret. And maybe he wouldn't show up for the date tomorrow. Then memories of this wonderful, magical evening would just live in her mind. But Christopher showed up. They went for coffee. Christopher said they would stay in their town for another 6 months. I just finished college, he said, and then I don't know what I'll do. Maybe join the circus. Maybe come up with something else. Hey, why did you choose such a profession? Karen asked. Oh, I've always loved making people laugh. Christopher made a funny face, and Karen couldn't hide her smile. I always got behavior notes in school. They said I made the class laugh uncontrollably. And again, they walked around the neighborhood. This time, Karen decided not to linger, or else her parents would start another scandal, or her mother would start meeting her after college classes. When she got home, Karen said she just chatted with her friends. And it seemed like they believed her. They met almost every day. Karen realized she had fallen in love with Christopher for the first time in her life. She dreamed of a future together, traveling around the country with him, living in hotels, washing his funny clown costumes. Anything was better than being the wife of the proper and boring Russell. A week later, Christopher invited her to his place. She understood perfectly where it was all heading. She was a little scared, but she couldn't refuse and didn't want to. Let him be her first man. And it didn't matter that they weren't married. She loves him. Isn't that enough reason? The first time was rushed and somehow too fast. But Christopher clearly felt satisfied with himself. Karen didn't tell him that she expected more. Some magic, unity, an explosion of emotions. It was pleasant and nothing more. From that day on, her visits to him became regular. She even skipped classes at college to spend time with him. Christopher was free during the day. The theater performances were in the evenings. They didn't even have to lie to her parents. They were sure Karen was attending classes. 4 months passed. 4 months that became perhaps the happiest in Karen's life. Her father sometimes brought up Russell and how she should start preparing for the wedding. Karen didn't understand how exactly she should prepare for it, but she nodded, thinking about the completely different wedding waiting for her. Christopher would definitely propose to her. The girl had no doubts about that. He loves her, and she loves him. Karen didn't care what her parents would say. She would do it her way. One evening, she and Jody were sitting in their room. Karen dozed off and Jody was reading a book. Suddenly, Jody got up and opened the closet. Darn it, cursed the older sister. Karen, lend me some like last month. I forgot to buy it again. Check my drawer, Karen mumbled, yawning, and suddenly it was like lightning struck her. 2 months. It's been 2 months since she used any feminine hygiene products, and that could only mean one thing. Oh my God, Karen sat up abruptly in bed. Sis, what's wrong? Jody turned to her. What happened? No, everything's fine. Karen shook her head. Jody approached her sister and sat on the edge of the bed. Karen, is there something you want to tell me? You look scared. The girl lowered her gaze in response. Jody, you see, I met someone. Learning about Christopher and their relationship, Jody turned pale as if she was about to faint. What? Dad will blow his top, Karen. I don't care, Karen whispered. I have to tell Christopher, and we'll leave here together. He has an apartment in the city. We'll get married. Everything will be fine. Oh, sis, and Dad has already chosen a restaurant for your wedding, by the way. And you? Though maybe there's nothing yet? Buy a test. Check. What if you're wrong? The next day, before classes, Karen rushed to the pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test. She took it right in the college restroom, trembling either from the cold or from horror. The second line appeared slowly but inevitably on the test. Karen felt like her heart stopped. She left the class without explaining anything to her classmates and went to find Christopher. In the lobby of the building where he lived, there was a security guard. He let her in without questions. He had already remembered Karen and understood where she was going. It made her feel a bit awkward, but right now, she was more concerned about what Christopher would say when he found out about the pregnancy. She knocked on the door. Christopher opened it right away, as if he had been waiting for her. "Hey!" He hugged Karen and pulled her inside. "Great surprise, wasn't expecting you." "Christopher, we need to talk." Karen nervously pulled at a strand of her hair. "Something happened." "What?" He stepped back from her and looked at her eyes with concern. "You're not sick, are you?" "No, I'm not sick, but, well, yes. "All right, Karen, just spill it." He gestured for her to sit down. She slumped, her shoulders drooping. Karen didn't know how to tell him she was expecting a baby, where to start, how people even break this news together. It's one thing when you're married and expecting, a long-awaited product of your love. It's a whole different story when it happens suddenly and unplanned. "Well, what is it?" He sat down next to her, crouching down and taking her hands in his. "Karen, come on. Tell me. Don't drag it out." "Christopher, I'm pregnant," Karen blurted out. "That's the situation." Well, Christopher repeated, his voice instantly losing its brightness. "And what now?" "What do you mean?" She was surprised. "I thought we need to decide what to do next." "And what's there to do?" He shrugged. "Well, I'm not planning on having kids anytime soon. Maybe in 3 years, 4. Where will I put him? I travel to different cities, live in who knows what conditions. And your parents are strict. You can't stay, they won't accept the baby. So we only have one option." "What other option, Christopher?" "Well, you're not a little girl anymore, Karen." He squeezed her shoulder so tightly it hurt. "Where will we put the baby? What will we do with it, even if we get married and leave? Do you want to raise it on the road?" "But I don't want to have an abortion," she whispered. "I can't. And my parents will find out. It's a small town. They'll definitely hear about me." "Oh, I'm sorry. Please forgive me." Christopher's face softened into a tender smile, although his grip on her shoulder remained just as tight and painful. "Karen, I overreacted. Come here, my little one." He hugged her. She rested her head on his shoulder and started to cry. How foolish everything turned out. She should have listened to her parents. But it's okay. Christopher will definitely come up with something. "Let's do this. Let's wait a week. I'll talk to my boss," Christopher whispered. "Maybe we can find some job that doesn't involve traveling, and if I can get on good terms with them, then we'll figure out what to do. I'm sorry for mentioning abortion. I shouldn't have. Of course, I love you, and we'll have a baby. For sure." "Really?" she sniffled. "Of course it's true." He kissed Karen on the neck and pulled her closer. "We'll be a family, don't worry. I believe in it." Then they lay in each other's arms on the worn-out couch and kissed. Long, sweet, and somehow painful, as if it were the last time. But Karen felt a bit relieved. Everything will be fine. Everything that happened for the best. Yes, she didn't plan on becoming a mom so early, but now she and Christopher will become a family, and her father will have to accept it. Then he escorted her home. Karen had dinner with her parents and went to bed. In the last few days she felt tired. Now she understood that her pregnancy was the reason for it. The next day she went to Christopher's place again after classes. The security guard stopped her with a gesture and called her over. "Are you going to Christopher's again?" "Yeah," Karen nodded. "Ah, dear." The guard sighed. "They left this morning, the whole troop." "They left? How come?" Karen was stunned. "Just like that." The guard looked at Karen sympathetically. "And you think you were the only one visiting him?" "There was another blonde. I kept thinking whether to tell you or not." "Well, it's not my business. Anyway, go home and forget about him. Find yourself a decent guy and don't think about him anymore." Karen didn't remember how she got back home. She didn't want anything, neither to live, nor to breathe, nor to think or feel. She dreamed of curling up into a ball and quietly disappearing, fading away. Like an image fades on old photographs. That's how her sister found her. "What's wrong, Karen?" "Christopher left. I don't know where," Karen whispered, "and I... Oh my God." Jody covered her mouth with her hand. "What are we going to do?" "Abortion, of course." Karen closed her eyes. Even saying the word was terrifying. "What if the parents find out?" Jody asked. "Oh, wait." Karen shook herself slightly by pulling a strand of hair. David's mom works at the hospital. Maybe we can find a doctor through her. Right, sis. Jody brightened up. I'll ask. And he won't rat me out? He won't, Jody nodded. I'll say it's for my old classmate. David doesn't know anything about you and Christopher, so don't worry. Okay, what are you whispering about? Mom peeked into the room. What's with all the secrets? Oh, Mom, it's nothing, Jody smiled. Just talking. Go set the table. Dad will be back soon, Mom ordered. And hurry up. The door closed. Karen squeezed her sister's hand. Ask, Jody. Ask for sure. A doctor was indeed found through David's mom, but it took a month. By then, Karen was already experiencing morning sickness, which was hard to hide from her parents. She tried to leave the house early to avoid running into her father and mother. By the afternoon, she felt slightly better, so she wasn't afraid of getting sick right at dinner. Her father had already announced the wedding date, April 25th. Well, what do you know? We found the restaurant, he said. Dominic picked it. He'll cover the bill. The rest is on us. Choose your dress. Karen almost said that her figure would change by April and there was no need to rush with the dress. But she managed to keep quiet. She hoped they would quickly perform the abortion, and all this would be forgotten like a bad dream. And then, she was ready to marry Russell and become the perfect wife for him, just to return life to its normal course, just so she wouldn't have this unwanted, life-disrupting child. And how did she get involved with Christopher, believing they would travel together, play the guitar, and have children? It was time to realize that life does indeed follow rules. Break the rules, and you lose immediately. You lose yourself, your soul, and your familiar existence, imperfect but yours. Karen flew to the doctor's office as if carried by invisible wings. She hoped it would all end. Yes, she'd have to endure a little on that terrifying chair, but then she'd have freedom and peace of mind. But they didn't perform the abortion. You're in your 16th week, said the elderly female doctor in her pristine white coat. What abortion, dear? Any kind, replied Karen. But there must be something that can be done, right? There is. You can give birth, the doctor shrugged sympathetically. Should have thought about it earlier if you didn't want a child. And what am I supposed to do? Karen let her legs hang off the examination chair. It felt like a heavy anvil had dropped onto her shoulders. She knew she'd never be able to straighten her back again. Well, there are options, sighed the doctor. For example, you could write a refusal at the maternity hospital. Good people will take your baby, or talk to your parents. You know it happens. At first they scold, but once the grandchild is born, they melt, their hearts soften. No, their hearts won't soften, Karen replied firmly. I know that for sure. 3 weeks later, her belly was impossible to hide. Her mother was the first to notice it. She asked Karen directly, and her daughter didn't lie. That same evening, a terrible scandal erupted. Her father wasn't just shouting. He threw dishes against the wall, flipped the kitchen table. Her mother didn't even try to calm him down. She stood there silently, staring at her youngest daughter, with hatred. You've brought shame upon us, her father screamed. Shame upon me. I didn't raise you to be some street girl. Go to your scoundrel, let him support you. You're no longer needed by me. You're no longer my daughter. Where should I go? Karen asked. I don't care, her father yelled. I'm leaving now, and when I come back in an hour, you better not be here. I don't have a second daughter anymore. And he left, slamming the door loudly. Karen looked plaintively at her mother. Pack your things, you heard what your father said. Jody returned as her younger sister packed her belongings into an old bag, suffocating with tears. What's going on? Mom seems out of it. Is Dad not here? Jody approached Karen and turned her towards herself. Karen, did they find out? Yes, the girl nodded. Oh my God. Jody sank onto the couch. But where will you go? I don't know. Karen picked up her favorite soft toy from the table, a ginger fluffy cat with a striped back. And she froze. Should she take it with her? Or perhaps leave it behind? Somehow, at the sight of this kitten, she suddenly felt so sick that she wanted to climb out the window. Wait, Jody rushed to her wardrobe. Hold on, I've got something. She pulled out a small box of candy. Karen, this is for you. David and I were saving up for the wedding. It should be enough to get you started." And Jody handed her sister a few bills, held together with a hair tie. Karen wanted to refuse, but then nodded and put the money in her suitcase. "Thank you, Jody." "Stay somewhere for now," Jody said confidently. "Eventually, our parents will calm down and you can come back." No, I won't go back," Karen shook her head. "Why should I go back?" "So where will you live? What will you do?" "I have no idea, Jody." Still, Karen put the cat in her bag. Perhaps that was it. She wouldn't be able to take all her belongings, but what she took should be enough for now. "Wait a moment, sis. I've got Aunt Ashley's number. Go to her." Jody started flipping through the notebook lying on the table. "Here, write down the digits." "Why, we're practically strangers," Karen frowned. "She's seen me only a couple of times in my childhood. Remember, she came for my birthday? She actually gave me this cat." "Just write it down, Karen," her sister insisted, and Karen took the number. Maybe it would come in handy after all, though she was sure Aunt Ashley wouldn't help her. She had 3 children of her own. They probably didn't live in a huge apartment or a big house where there would be enough space for Karen. Lucy didn't say goodbye to her youngest daughter. Only Jody escorted her to the bus stop. "Karen, go to the city. Call Aunt Ashley. She'll come up with something. Maybe you rent a hotel for a while, then come back." "Okay." Karen saw the bus approaching the stop, hugged her sister, and picked up the heavy bag. "So, Jody, see you later." "See you. David and I will come to you later, and then you'll come back. You'll definitely come back when the storm settles. I'll talk to our parents, I promise," Jody said. Karen nodded inwardly, realizing that there was no question of returning. Her parents made it clear she was no longer needed by them. So be it. But what to do with the baby? How to raise it? On what? Or perhaps she should indeed write a refusal at the maternity hospital. Half an hour later, Karen was at the train station. The train to the city wasn't due until morning. She had to spend the night in the waiting hall. Luckily, they didn't kick people out from there. Karen even managed to doze off. She narrowly missed the train. She woke up because a woman with a wheeled bag passed by and ran over Karen's legs. Loading onto the train, the girl sat down in her seat and fell asleep soundly. After 9 hours, she arrived at her final destination. Karen had been to the city several times before, traveling with her parents and with her class on excursions, as well as to museums and theaters. But what should she do now? Where should she go? How could she find a hotel? Karen sat in the waiting area and pondered. I wonder if her parents were worried about her. Did they regret kicking her out? And how could she explain to Russell that his fiancée, not only pregnant, had also run away from home and nobody knew where she was now? However, there were some benefits to this situation. Russell probably wouldn't want to marry her now, one less problem to deal with, although dozens of other problems had arisen. But she had to think positively. Karen asked the guard where she could make a call. He waved his hand in a direction. "Go over there, there are telephone booths." Karen found the telephone booths quickly. She waited for one of them to become available, but she had no choice but to call Ashley. She could only hope that the woman wasn't sleeping or working at the moment. Aunt Ashley answered the phone quickly. "Hello," she said cheerfully. "Aunt Ashley, hello, it's Karen." "Karen? Which Karen?" The woman was surprised. "Well, your niece." Karen's enthusiasm waned. Aunt Ashley didn't even remember who she was. What could she hope for in this situation? "Oh, Karen, hi. Where are you? Something happened to your parents?" "No, I arrived in the city," Karen said. "And it just so happened, but anyway, I have nowhere to go." "I understand you. And where exactly are you now?" "At the train station." "I see. Okay, stay there. I'll be there soon. You'll tell me the details in person, but I'm very curious." "Aunt Ashley, how will I recognize you?" "You'll recognize me, don't worry," Ashley chuckled. "You'll see the most beautiful car. Go to it, that's mine. I'll be there in about 10 minutes, Karen. I live near the station." Karen hung up the phone. Hope was starting to emerge. Now she would have a place to stay. As for how to live on from here, Karen tried not to think about it. In her situation, her planning horizon was limited to a few days, if not hours. Karen stepped out onto the station square. There were people around, taxis coming and going. Which car, according to Aunt Ashley, was the most beautiful? Karen didn't know anything about cars at all. People milled about, taxis came and went. Which car, according to Aunt Ashley, was the most beautiful? Karen didn't have a clue about cars. A few minutes later, a bright red car pulled up at the entrance. It had orange-yellow flames painted along the sides, twirling into a whimsical pattern. The car stopped. The front door opened, and there stood a slender blonde, dressed in a yellow chick-colored sweater. "Karen, is that you?" the blonde asked. "Aunt Ashley?" Karen was taken aback. "Oh, please don't call me Aunt, for heaven's sake. Makes me feel old." Ashley smiled. "Come on, throw your luggage in and let's get going." Delighted, Karen struggled to fit her bag into the trunk and settled into the front seat. Aunt Ashley hit the gas. "So I take it you didn't leave home because they loved you too much, huh?" Karen nodded sadly in response. "Yeah, you could say I was kicked out." Ashley laughed. "Oh, predictable. Did you assert some independence, Karen?" "Something like that," she replied. "My dad just found me a suitor." "Uh-huh, ran away from a wedding then," Ashley surmised. "I approve, really, I do. I ran away once too. Dad thought I should be a noble lady, stay at home and wait for him to pick a husband for me. I thought otherwise. Saved up some money and ran away. They never forgave me. But I have no regrets. I'm living, as you see. And you'll manage too. We'll find you a job while you bunk with me." "Is that convenient?" Karen was worried. "Not really," Ashley smirked. "I've got 3 kids, the eldest is 12, the youngest 7, and there's a recently acquired husband still on probation though. But don't you worry." "On probation?" Karen was surprised. "Yeah," Ashley glanced at her niece and winked. "A man has to prove he makes a woman's life easier and better, not harder and worse, right? If it's worse with him, then what's the point of him, right?" "Yeah, right," Karen couldn't help but agree. "There's just one problem. You see, Aunt Ashley, just Ashley. I'm pregnant." "Really, is that a problem? In your case, yes, but we'll figure something out. Is that why they kicked you out?" "Never mind. You don't have to answer. Clearly not by the guy your dad chose, right?" "Yes, right. Not by him," Karen confessed. "By another man." "And who was this other man, if it's no secret?" "He was a clown," Karen replied. Ashley burst into such loud and genuine laughter that Karen couldn't help but smile too. "They're all clowns," she declared, having laughed it off. "Well, here we are. Karen, let's get you out, and I'll help with the bag, because it's hardly advisable for you to be lifting weights in your condition. Present day. So, how about it?" Lawrence stood by the mirror examining his reflection. "A king?" Karen giggled, whether it was at how skillfully Lawrence adjusted his crown askew or his puffed cheeks.
King, the woman nodded. "Tell me, haven't you dressed up a bit early? The guys expect us at 2 and it's only 12 now.
They had agreed that Ian and Valerie would register their marriage together and then head to a restaurant for the main part of the celebration. So Karen was in no hurry. She took her time enjoying a shower, applying a face mask, and even managed to tidy up the kitchen. Meanwhile, her husband, Lawrence, had been anxiously pacing in his suit since morning. Karen found his concern endearing. After all, Valerie wasn't his biological daughter, but she was a piece of his soul, cliché as it might sound. "Maybe you should start getting ready too. We still have to call a taxi," he remarked. "Oh, calling a taxi takes forever, I beg you," Karen stretched lazily. "You'll sit down and crease your suit." "It's velvet, it doesn't crease." Lawrence sat next to Karen on the sofa, caressing her leg, peeking through the slit of her dress. "Karen, have you ever tried anything regal with a royal figure?" What are you insinuating, Your Highness?" She frowned. "Some kind of indecency?" "Why some kind? Only the most exquisite indecencies." Lawrence pulled Karen closer and kissed her. She pushed him away gently, frowning in mock anger. "Look, I get you're anxious, but I'm not ready to relieve your stress in that way." Too bad." Lawrence leaned back, looking disappointed. "I had hoped—" "Save your hopes for tomorrow," Karen advised. "Today we have an important and responsible day. Not a wife, but a witch. No involvement in her husband's life." Lawrence squinted at her. Time for the witch to get ready. Karen stood up and tousled his hair. Otherwise, we might be late. Karen went to the bedroom, where her dress hung in the closet. A long, light gray dress made of velvet and organza, embroidered with tiny sequins. Initially, Karen didn't even want to try it on, thinking it too gaudy. But seeing her reflection, she reconsidered. Why not? After all, she had been careful with her diet, allowing herself no excesses. Her figure was as it had been in her youth, even if her face wasn't. Lawrence, however, loved Karen's wrinkles, especially those around her eyes. He often kissed them, saying they were rays, proving that his Karen laughed often, and if she laughed often, it meant she had a wonderful husband. Karen couldn't argue with that. She quickly applied her makeup, drew her eyeliner, and painted her lips with red lipstick. Today was the day for it. Then, she slipped into her dress and let her hair down. Why not? She looked good. Maybe it was indeed time to consider having a third child. She twirled in front of the mirror and smiled. Striking. Indeed, her daughter Valerie was right to plan a masquerade. "Who are you, fair lady?" Lawrence peeked into the room. He looked at Karen with surprise, as if seeing her for the first time. "Dear, did you really not recognize me?" she sighed. "Just step away for 5 minutes, and oh, please." Lawrence silently approached Karen and embraced her. "I love you," he whispered in her ear. "You know how much I love you, right?" "Of course I know, and I love you too, dear," whispered Karen in response. Her heart felt like it was washed over by a warm wave. A thought flashed. It was a pity that Jenna couldn't be with them today. She truly adored Valerie. It seemed she loved Karen too, in her own way. "Dear, call the taxi." Karen leaned her forehead against his shoulder. "Or we really will be late." "Just don't cry," she thought, having held it together since morning. "Yes, calling. Lawrence tenderly kissed his wife on the cheek. "Don't forget your mask." The mask lay on the dresser, black, adorned with a golden pattern and a gray feather above the right temple. Karen held the mask to her face and looked in the mirror again. Yes, she truly looked stunning. Perhaps Lawrence was right. A third child. Not a bad idea at all. 10 minutes later, they were in a taxi. The car was taking them to the restaurant. Lawrence gently held Karen's hand. She looked out the window, trying not to cry. Valerie, her little girl. Just yesterday, she went to school. Not long ago, she spent evenings in her aunt's apartment, sketching dresses in her notebooks under the light of an old yellow floor lamp. Karen kept those notebooks. They reminded her of Valerie's challenging yet blissful childhood. Finally, they arrived at the restaurant. Lawrence got out first and gallantly extended his hand to his wife. Karen put on her mask and stepped out of the car. Together with her husband, they entered the restaurant. The first to notice them was Billy, dressed in a pageboy costume. "Mom!" The girl rushed to her parents and hung on Lawrence's neck. "Dad, it's so wonderful here, and Valerie looks so beautiful, and Ian too." "It's good that Ian looks handsome too." Lawrence nodded. "I was worried, in case something—" "Hi, Mom." Valerie didn't just approach Karen, she seemed to glide towards her. Karen couldn't help but admire her daughter. With her long, light red hair cascading over her shoulders, gray eyes, and a slender figure, Karen sometimes couldn't believe she had brought such a beautiful being into the world. "Mom, Dad, can you believe it? They actually married us today." "Yes, and I was hoping until the last moment they'd refuse," Lawrence said, wrapping his arms around his daughter and spinning her around. "Congratulations, my dear." Valerie laughed, wriggled free from her father's grasp, and adjusted her white mask that had slipped to the side. "Come on, we've been waiting just for you. Everyone's already in place." Karen and Lawrence entered the flower-adorned hall and took their seats at the table next to the newlyweds. On the other side sat Ian's parents. His mother, Tricia, was dressed as a queen, and his father had chosen a footman's costume. Karen winked at Tricia, who was teary-eyed. Tricia winked back and smiled guiltily, as if apologizing for not being able to hold back her emotions. The host appeared. He too wore a mask that covered half of his face, but no costume. He was dressed in a pristine white shirt and ironed black trousers. Karen froze. "Christopher." She recognized him even behind the mask. Tall, slender, and those eyes. Eyes she remembered for a lifetime. Just like Valeri's, the only thing she inherited from her father. "What's wrong?" Lawrence gently touched Karen's shoulder. "You've lost all color." "Sorry, please," Karen said, taking a glass of champagne with a trembling hand for a small sip to calm her nerves. "I'm just nervous." Meanwhile, Christopher spoke about how they had all entered a fairy tale today, about miracles and eternal love, about happiness and fidelity. And Karen watched him, unable to take her eyes off. Maybe she should leave. Say she felt ill, a headache, or stomachache. But that would upset her daughter. Why ruin the children's celebration they had prepared for so long? She had to endure, to hold herself together. Aunt Ashley would have laughed at this situation. She always knew how to laugh at any situation, no matter how terrible or frightening it seemed at first glance. Karen was initially put off by this. But then she understood it was the only way not to go insane when life hits you hard. And actually, what was happening now was not a hit, but rather a light slap. The host was hosting various contests with the guests eagerly participating. Then came the toasts, followed by the newlyweds' first dance. Karen's gaze kept shifting from the smiling Valeri to Christopher, who stood by a speaker sipping champagne. He would have been shocked to realize he was attending his own daughter's wedding. As time flew by, Karen was relieved that Lawrence believed her emotional state was simply due to Valeri's marriage. The last thing she wanted was for her husband to find out who the host was, fearing Lawrence might confront Christopher physically. Lawrence was a kind man, but unlikely to forgive someone who had wronged Karen and Valeri so deeply. Finally, it was announced that ladies would invite the gentlemen to dance. "Go dance with the queen," Karen smiled, implying it was the proper thing to do. "I want to dance with the fairy," pouted Lawrence. "Your Majesty, do not break tradition." Karen adjusted Lawrence's collar and smiled. "The queen looks exceptionally beautiful today." Her husband nodded obediently and went to Tricia. Karen, however, headed towards Christopher. Her legs carried her forward as if of their own accord, and she saw no reason to resist. "May I have this dance?" She offered her gloved hand to him. "Of course," Christopher bowed lightly. "I'm honored to be asked by one of the most beautiful ladies at this ball." As they danced, Karen studied his face, almost unchanged, except for a few wrinkles. "Have we met before?" Christopher suddenly asked. "You seem familiar." And Karen almost blurted out that he had seen her in his bed over 2 decades ago. "Perhaps," she replied enigmatically. "Anything's possible." A flicker of recognition passed through his eyes. "Still a beautiful fairy. Where could I have met you before?" "Long ago in a distant kingdom, a storyteller," Karen responded. Christopher frowned, then his phone rang abruptly in his pocket. He stopped dancing. "Oh, please excuse me." He took out his phone and stepped away, with Karen overhearing bits of his conversation. "Yes, I understand. Rita, don't worry. Everything will work out. They'll find it." Someone touched Karen's shoulder. She turned around and it was Lawrence. "Ah, ditched me for the handsome host? Now I'm as lonely as a wolf." "Let's go home, okay?" Karen asked. "Dear, I'm terribly tired and my head is splitting." "Is something wrong?" Lawrence looked at her worriedly. "You want to leave now?" "Yes, I do." Karen nodded. Arm in arm with her husband, she walked to the table where Valerie and Ian were sitting. She managed to glance back. Christopher was looking after her with a stunned expression. And Karen knew. He had recognized her. 23 years ago, Karen woke up a while ago, but she didn't want to get up. She lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything that had happened to her in the past few days. She found out she was expecting a baby, got kicked out of her house and moved to the city, and now she was in Aunt Ashley's kitchen, having no idea what to do next. Perhaps she should look for a job, but who would hire her? Soon enough, her belly would be huge. Well, it was already noticeable if you looked closely. No employer would want her. Of course, she would give up the baby. There was no question about it. Karen simply couldn't afford to raise a child. Plus, she had nowhere to live. Aunt Ashley already had 3 children, all crammed into a small 2-bedroom apartment where there was simply no room for Karen and her baby. Maybe Aunt Ashley would agree to take her niece in, but Karen herself wouldn't agree to that. She really didn't want to burden her relative, and she felt ashamed enough already because she suddenly appeared in her life. Awake? Aunt Ashley entered the kitchen, dressed in a colorful robe. Her hair was tied up in a high bun. Karen couldn't help but admire her delicate neck and graceful oval face. You wouldn't think that this woman worked as a taxi driver and had 3 kids. Yes, I'm awake, Karen said, sitting up and forcing a smile, trying to smooth out her tousled hair. Aunt Ashley, I'm sorry it turned out this way. Yeah, you apologized all evening yesterday. I felt awkward. The woman put the kettle on the stove, sat down at the table, took cigarettes out of her pocket, and then, after some thought, put them back. But smoke, go ahead and smoke. Karen nervously played with the collar of the t-shirt that Aunt Ashley had given her as a nightshirt. No, you're in a delicate condition. It's harmful for you to breathe in smoke. Ashley tapped her fingers on the table. What are we going to do, dear? I understand your parents aren't going to help you? I'll get a job, rent a room, and then I'll give birth and give up the baby. And Aunt Ashley looked surprisingly at Karen. You'll give up? You can't. What am I supposed to do with it? Karen sobbed. I have nothing, and my parents certainly won't take me back. I've disgraced them. Oh, the parents don't tell me anything about them. They're idiots, Ashley declared. With their stupid principles, they made something up and live as if that's how it should be. Look at me. I raised 3 kids, bought an apartment, asked a friend to watch the kids, and then put them in daycare. I almost cried. It was so sad, you know. 6 in the morning, I'm off to work. The eldest was 2 years old. He clung to me crying, but I had to leave. But we made it, you know. What a horror, Karen sighed. She didn't want such a fate. That's right, a horror. Ashley nodded. And then I met Dylan. We got married. Together, we earned the apartment. Karen had a question on the tip of her tongue about where Dylan, the father of Aunt Ashley's younger children, had gone. Ashley seemed to understand everything without words. He died when the youngest was 2. He worked on a construction site, fell from the 10th floor. I'm alone again. Well, with the apartment, her lips twisted into a semblance of a smile. But I made it. I can't imagine now what it would have been like if I had given up on the children. And you, Karen, don't you dare. Everything will work out somehow. Yes, it's hard. Who said it would be easy? No one said. Karen agreed. The kettle whistled. For some reason, Karen felt warm and cozy at the sound. It felt like home. The smell of fresh baking, the kettle's whistle early in the morning. Breakfast for the whole family. How she wished she had all of this, even without Christopher. Her family was her child, but she wouldn't cope. She couldn't. Karen shook her head. It would all work out somehow. Her child would be better off without her in a loving family that could provide what she couldn't. But realizing all this was difficult. So you just relax for now. Ashley placed a cup of tea in front of Karen. Take your time to gather strength and we'll figure something out. We'll find you a job. I have a lot of acquaintances, I have connections, and if things get really bad, without a roof over your head, I won't leave you, understood? Yes, I understand, thank you, Karen replied.
Don't worry, Karen, I'm with you. Aunt Ashley smiled. Let's have some tea before it gets cold.
The following week, Karen stayed with Aunt Ashley. She cleaned, she cooked. She wanted to be useful somehow. She even managed to make friends with Ashley's children. They surprisingly accepted her arrival calmly, as if their mother brought home unfamiliar women every day. Karen's parents refused to talk to Ashley. Her father stated that Karen belonged there, with the wayward aunt who abandoned her family and gave birth to a bunch of children. After that conversation, Ashley trembled with indignation. You know, both of you should have left after school. You could have gone to college in a big city, lived in a dormitory. What kind of parents do you have? I can't imagine what had to happen for me to refuse or kick my children out of the house. Karen didn't know how to respond to Aunt Ashley. She too had planned to give up her child and understood that it was in its best interest. Perhaps her mother and father had reasoned the same way. A week later, Ashley came home from work in a great mood. Karen was preparing dinner, cutting salad, which she planned to serve with mashed potatoes and cutlets. "Karen, I found you a job," Aunt Ashley announced as she entered the kitchen. "What kind?" Karen asked eagerly. "What kind? A great one." The woman plopped down on the couch. "Tired. The clients were unbearable today." "Well, what's the job?" Karen placed the knife on the table, her hands trembling with excitement. "Listen, I have a friend who went to Asia with her husband. This friend has an aunt. She's elderly, lives alone, has a big apartment. She needs someone to take care of her health, clean, cook. Well, sometimes accompany her to the doctor. The friend loves her aunt, but she can't take her to Asia. No other relatives. So I told them about you, Karen, and based on my recommendation, they'll take you. You're not planning to steal from her, are you?" "No, of course not. I'm not planning to," Karen replied. "Well, there you go. You cook well and you can mop the floor too." "What about the fact that I'm pregnant? Did you tell them?" "Yeah," Ashley nodded. "You'll work as long as you can and then we'll see. Just know that Aunt is cranky. She might say something hurtful, but don't pay attention to it. She's always been like that. They'll pay you decently. Not much, but you'll save up for the baby, and I'll give you a stroller, a crib, clothes. I've kept everything, just had a feeling." Karen wanted to say that the crib probably wouldn't be necessary. After all, she planned to give up the child. But in the end, she kept silent. Ashley probably wouldn't approve of such a decision. "When can I meet her?" Karen asked. "Tomorrow we'll go in the morning. I've already arranged it with Jenna. Jenna is the woman you'll have to live with and take care of. Don't be afraid of her. She just talks a lot, but she won't harm you," Ashley reassured her. Karen felt uneasy. What could this Jenna possibly say to her? For some reason, she imagined an old woman dressed in shabby clothes with gray hair braided into a thin braid. The old woman had a mean expression on her face and dull eyes. But it's better than causing trouble for Aunt Ashley, Karen thought. She had to live for today because she wasn't in a position to make long-term plans. The next day, Aunt Ashley and Karen went for an interview with Jenna. She lived in the city center. Karen was impressed by Jenna's house, the molding, the cute balconies. They went up to the second floor. Ashley pressed the doorbell. A couple of minutes later, footsteps sounded behind the door. "Who's there?" "Jenna, it's Ashley, with Karen." The door opened. Karen saw a tall woman, almost a head taller than her. Her braid really was like a crown around her head. The woman's thin lips, whom Karen couldn't call an old woman for anything, were lined with terracotta lipstick. Her gray eyes looked cold and unkind. "Ashley, with Karen? Did my niece tell you that I don't need caregivers?" She did, Ashley smiled, "but still." "Well, come in." Jenna pursed her lips. "I'm only doing this because she asked me to, so she could feel better." The guests entered the spacious apartment, furnished with antique furniture. Karen had never seen such luxury. Real wood. Carpets on the floor, apparently handmade. On the walls, Karen noticed oil paintings, several landscapes, and a portrait of a young woman dressed in a white robe. The woman stood by the window, half-turned, and smiled mysteriously. Jenna led them to the kitchen and gestured for them to sit down. She didn't offer them tea. "This is Karen," Ashley began. "And is Karen mute or something?" Jenna asked. "No," squeaked the frightened girl. "Too bad," Jenna sighed. "Can Karen tell us about herself?" "What is there to tell?" Karen was flustered. "Well, where did you study? What can you do? Why should I even let you into my house?" Karen briefly told about herself, and the story came out extremely unconvincing. Of course, she kept silent about her pregnancy. Karen understood that if she were in Jenna's place, she would have kicked her out right away. "Everything is clear." Jenna gracefully sank onto the couch and crossed her legs. "Everything is clear." "What do you mean, Jenna?" Ashley asked cautiously. "Well, it's clear that the girl has nowhere to live," Jenna smirked. "And you decided to kill two birds with one stone." "Oh, well, I don't mind. The apartment is big. I think we won't even see each other if we don't want to. Ashley, I trust you, so I'm willing to take your niece on a trial basis." "Really?" Karen brightened. "Do you think I'm joking?" Jenna gave Karen a contemptuous glance. "Your room will be at the end of the hallway. I'll let you know what you need to do later." Returning to Ashley to gather her things, Karen was both happy and terribly afraid. Happy because she had a job now, but afraid? Afraid that Jenna would find out about her condition and kick her out. But she had no choice. Aunt Ashley helped Karen gather herself. "Tell me, is she always like this?" Karen asked. "No, of course not," Ashley laughed. "Sometimes she's silent, well, when she sleeps. Don't be afraid of her, really." "Oh, thank you, Aunt Ashley, I'll try." Karen sighed. "What else can I do?" "Well, if anything, just come back to me," Aunt Ashley waved her hand. "Everything will be fine, Karen, don't worry, really." An hour later, Karen was already in Jenna's apartment. The landlady led her to a small room. "Thank you," Karen forced a smile. "Can I use the wardrobe?" "You can scatter your things all over the floor for all I care," Jenna shrugged. "I won't be coming in here anyway." Karen felt embarrassed. Yes, she couldn't have come up with a dumber question. Jenna leaned against the doorframe and crossed her arms over her chest. "I have only one question, girl." Karen nervously swallowed. "And what's the question?" "What month is it?" "September," Karen replied, surprised. "Oh, Lord, you're a smart one." Jenna shook her head. "And how far along are you?" Karen involuntarily looked at her belly. It seemed small to her, and she was wearing a loose t-shirt. "Karen, I've worked as an obstetrician-gynecologist my whole life," Jenna explained. "And you think you can hide something like this from me? I can tell a pregnant woman at 2 weeks if I need to." "I'm 16 weeks, Karen confessed, I think." "Ha, you're a responsible mom." Jenna sarcastically chuckled. "All right, settle in here. I won't bother you." When the door closed behind Jenna, Karen breathed a sigh of relief. Well, she got into it. What a nasty piece of work Jenna was. Instead of keeping quiet, she had to show off. And then she had to hint that Karen would be a bad mother. But she wouldn't be a mother at all. She'd give birth and give the child to those who needed it more. That was settled. Full stop. A new life began for Karen. She cleaned up Jenna's apartment, cooked. Once she had to accompany the woman to the hospital, Jenna didn't like the idea and demanded that Karen walk several meters behind her. "I don't want people looking at me and thinking I'm a feeble old woman who needs assistance," she explained. Living with Jenna, Karen managed to call her sister, Jody. Usually her mother or father would answer the phone. Karen would just listen to their voices and then hang up. But finally her sister picked up. "Karen, where are you? How are you?" Jody asked anxiously. "Mom and Dad forbid me to talk about you at all, and I'm going crazy." "I'm fine," Karen replied. "I work for a woman. I have a roof over my head. I'm not starving." "Oh, thank God," exclaimed Jody, "and Russell proposed to me." Karen nervously swallowed. "Instead of me, little sister?" "Oh, something like that. Call again. Dad's back. Bye."
Suddenly, Karen heard Jenna's voice.
"Karen, please tell me, do you visit a doctor?" "No," she confessed. Jenna stood behind her, looking through her lashes as if examining an unknown insect. "Well, why not? You need to get registered, Karen." "I will," the guest promised. "So go and get registered," Jenna exclaimed. "I don't need you dying in my house. Go to the hospital and say you're from Jenna Douglas." "I'll figure something out," muttered Karen. "And I still have to mop the corridor. Where am I supposed to go now?" "Not figure something out, but go to the hospital quickly. You need more rest, and you don't need to mop the floor here." Karen had to obey. She went to the hospital or Jenna wouldn't leave her alone. Days passed quickly. Jenna never missed a chance to belittle Karen. Karen simply nodded, listening to her landlady's sarcastic remarks. Karen had no other choice. Her belly grew, and surprisingly, Karen felt good. But what annoyed her the most were conversations about the future child. Jenna insisted that Karen attend young motherhood classes. Karen couldn't admit that she planned to give up the baby, but listening to lectures about swaddling, colic, and breathing during childbirth was unbearable. One day, Karen decided to skip another lecture. She sat in her room, having finished all her tasks for the day. She was just reading a detective novel borrowed from her landlady's library. There was a knock on the door. Jenna entered without waiting for a response. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I'm resting." Karen nodded towards the book lying on her lap. "Reading." "Let's go to the classes right now." Jenna frowned. "I don't want to," Karen chuckled. You have to. Do you want a disabled child or something? I don't care, Karen blurted out. I don't know if this will help at all. Listen to me, it will help. Jenna approached Karen closely and leaned over her. I told you to go, otherwise I'll fire you. What? Karen couldn't believe her ears. I repeat, otherwise I'll fire you, Jenna said. If you don't show responsibility towards the future child, then you're a bad worker, right? Well, Karen started. Who? Jenna squinted. Who? Tell me. It doesn't matter. Karen reluctantly stood up. I'll go. Right choice. And remember, you'll give birth in the best shape. I've already found a doctor for you. Karen looked at Jenna skeptically. Why do I need a doctor? Don't ask stupid questions. Don't annoy me. Overall, Karen's relationship with Jenna was not going well. Karen began to think that someone had cursed her. Her parents didn't love her. Jenna treated her like a servant. Christopher left her when he found out she was pregnant. Perhaps Karen was meant to be alone, although maybe that wasn't so bad after all. At least no one would say nasty things to her. The due date was approaching. It was becoming increasingly difficult for Karen to clean up and cook. To her surprise, Jenna took over these responsibilities herself. It turned out that she didn't need a housekeeper at all. Karen didn't say it out loud, but she often wondered, why did Jenna hire her to calm her niece, or to have someone to take out her anger on? 2 weeks before the expected due date, Karen woke up from a sharp pain in her lower abdomen. Jenna immediately called an ambulance. They took the young woman to the maternity hospital, the one Jenna's acquaintance doctor chose. Karen didn't resist surrendering to fate. Soon all of this would be over. She would get rid of the belly that reminded her of Christopher and her terrible mistake, and Karen would be free. Maybe she would go somewhere alone and start over. Or perhaps she would try to go back to her parents. This nightmare had to end eventually. The delivery was difficult. Karen suffered from contractions for almost 20 hours, and finally her daughter was born. The young mother refused to look at the baby. What's this? The midwife exclaimed. Just like this, I don't want to. Karen turned away. I'm giving up this child. What are you talking about, dear? How can you say that? The midwife was puzzled. Such a healthy girl, so beautiful. Look, she's a beauty. Take her away, Karen screamed. I don't want her. I don't want this baby. The baby was taken away. Karen spent 2 hours in the delivery room. Then she was taken to her room. The nurses avoided her gaze and didn't ask anything. But Karen felt only a strange, frightening emptiness inside her. A thought flashed through her mind. So this is what they mean when they say, they knocked the soul out of him. Maybe she didn't have a soul at all now. The next day, Karen woke up to someone shaking her shoulder. She opened her eyes and saw Jenna. Her gaze was like lightning. What's this? Jenna shouted. I'm getting calls about your antics. What does this mean, refusing the baby? That's none of your business, Karen hissed. Why are you meddling in my life? Who are you anyway? I'll leave you tomorrow. Wait, no refusal, Jenna said firmly. Do you understand me? This is your daughter, and yours alone. I have nowhere to go with her. Karen's fists clenched on their own. Her breath was erratic. I was kicked out of my home, and the baby's father ran away as soon as he found out about the pregnancy. I have nowhere to live, and I have no money. I'll do her better if I refuse. All right, come on, let's go. Jenna stood up and grabbed Karen's hand. Get up. I'm not going anywhere. I feel bad. Karen tried to free her hand, but Jenna held it too tightly. I checked your chart. You're feeling fine. No need to lie to me. Jenna pulled harder. Get up, I'm telling you. Karen had to comply. Jenna dragged her past the station where astonished nurses sat. She dragged her past the elevators, past the benches where young mothers sat. Where are we going? Karen asked. Suddenly she felt awkward. She was only wearing a dirty nightshirt, her hair was a mess, and she had only socks on her feet. You'll see soon enough, Jenna hissed in response. It turned out they were heading to the newborn nursery. Here, Karen, look. Karen saw the tiny cribs. In each one lay a newborn. Somehow she immediately noticed her daughter. The baby slept peacefully, her chubby lips moving in her sleep. Her brows were amusingly raised, as if she was seeing some wonderful dream. "Well, what now, Karen? Will you leave her?" Jenna asked in a soft voice. "Why did they let us in here?" Karen didn't take her enchanted gaze off her daughter. "Well, I've worked here all my life, you silly," sighed Jenna. "Who's going to stop me?" Suddenly, Karen felt the emptiness inside her explode, burst like a balloon pricked with a needle. The young mother burst into tears, hiding her face in her hands. Unexpectedly, she felt a soft touch. Jenna gently stroked her head. "Cry, it'll make you feel better." "Cry," the woman repeated. "And take the girl, I'll help you however I can." "Karen, you can't leave her. You can't refuse." They stood like that together for a long time. Nurses walked by, not daring to expel Jenna, who was embracing the exhausted Karen. She went home with Valerie. Aunt Ashley, her children, and of course Jenna, were there to meet her. Soon Karen realized she was risking making the biggest mistake of her life. She loved Valerie the moment she held her. The love she had hidden blossomed brightly, painting Karen's life in new colors. Now it wasn't Karen helping Jenna, it was Jenna helping Karen. Often she scolded the young mother. "Oh, who holds her like that?" grumbled Jenna. "The baby's neck will be crooked." "It won't, I'm holding her fine," Karen retorted. "Oh, stubborn girl." Jenna took Valerie from her mother and laid her down the way she thought was right. "There, see? Her neck is straight." Karen learned a lot about Jenna. The woman had indeed worked as a doctor all her life, had been married 3 times, and had been unhappy all 3 times. No man could stand Jenna's character. Jenna never had children herself. "I had an abortion out of stupidity," she admitted one day while sitting in a chair and feeding Valerie from a bottle. "So it turned out I'm infertile. Well, at least there's a niece. I spoiled her as best I could." So they lived together, Jenna, Karen, and little Valerie. They argued with each other. They adored the baby, took turns cooking, and went out with Valerie. Karen didn't ask Jenna questions. If the woman was ready to help, then so be it. And when she got tired of playing the caring grandmother, she would have to leave. When Valerie turned 1, Karen realized she needed to go back to work. Jenna had money, and she never reproached Karen for it. But the young mother wanted to have her own income, and she couldn't continue to consider herself just a housekeeper. "So where will you go, tell me?" asked the hostess when Karen told her about her plans. "What can you do anyway?" "Well, nothing special really," Karen shrugged. "I can cook, wash dishes and floors." "You need to learn," sighed Jenna. "It seems like the only thing you've achieved in life is giving birth, isn't it?" "What's that supposed to mean?" Karen was surprised. "To give birth to a cute baby," she smiled. "But that's not a difficult task, you know. You did well with Valerie, and now prove that you can do something else in this life." Karen found a job as a dishwasher in a restaurant. The schedule suited her, and the pay was decent. The young woman decided that for a start, it was quite good. While she was at work, Jenna stayed with Valerie. Valerie firmly believed that Jenna was her real grandmother. By an unspoken agreement, nobody rushed to convince her otherwise. The restaurant where Karen worked had a karaoke zone. Sometimes Karen sang there, reminiscing about her past passion. To her surprise, her performances were always met with applause, but this only made Karen feel sad. Who knows how her life would have turned out if it weren't for Christopher? Maybe Karen could have dedicated herself to music? One day, while Karen was washing dishes, the head manager approached her. "Karen, I have a request, a strange one," he said. "What request?" Karen asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "I don't understand." "Over there, a group is sitting in the hall demanding a singer to perform something by Michael Jackson." "So what does that have to do with me?" Karen raised an eyebrow. "Where am I supposed to find a singer for you?" "Do you know the lyrics?" The manager hurriedly pulled Karen by her apron strings. "Take it off and go. They leave good tips. And we don't have any singers. Come on, Karen, help us out." "But I'm shy," Karen said, flustered, pulling off her apron over her head. "Is it really necessary?" She was dressed in a simple knee-length dress that Jenna had given her. "Yes, it's necessary." The manager pushed her forward. "Go. They don't care about your outfit. They're already drunk. Just sing, please. I'll give you a bonus." Terrified, Karen went to the karaoke zone. At a table, she noticed a group of men. 4 of them were clearly drunk. "Sing Michael Jackson," one of them demanded. "How long do we have to wait?" Karen swallowed nervously. What if they didn't like it? The manager looked at Karen hopefully, clasping his hands over his chest in a prayer-like gesture. And Karen sang a Michael Jackson song, then 3 more songs, and then again. To her surprise, her performance was met with tremendous enthusiasm. The men applauded, raised their glasses, and even invited the ladies from the neighboring tables to dance. Finally, they let Karen go. She returned to the kitchen, trembling, her legs turning to jelly, and her back feeling like a block of ice. The manager ran up to her and kissed her on the cheeks. "Karen, you're a talent. I didn't know you could do that. Here's the bonus I promised, and you have an extra day off. I'll wash the dishes myself after this." Karen returned home in a lifted mood. At dinner, she told Jenna what had happened. "Well, you do sing pretty well, I suppose," Jenna remarked. "I won't say it's genius, maybe, but it's pleasant to listen to." "Thank you very much. I'll take it as a compliment. And tell me, how was Valerie behaving?" "She behaved well," nodded Jenna. "As I've said many times before, if there's one thing that worked out in your life, it's Valerie for sure. Maybe you should try singing more? I don't think you'll become famous, but performing in restaurants, why not?" "So you see my future like that?" "To be honest, I see your future as extremely uncertain, dear, as long as you don't have an education," sighed Jenna. "But it's worth a try." And Karen tried. First, she sang in the restaurant where she had been working before. Then she started getting invitations to perform at other venues. The pay was decent for the young woman. While the fees themselves were not significant, the patrons could tip her for singing their chosen songs, which was a nice addition to the family budget. When Valerie turned 1.5 years old, Karen learned that Jody had married Russell. She accidentally ran into David, Jody's ex-fiancé, on the street, and he told Karen that Jody's father had insisted on the wedding. "Poor Jody," sighed Karen, looking at her sister's former fiancé. "Yeah, we should have run away together," said David. "You managed it, though, and she didn't dare." "I might not have managed it," Karen said sadly. "I have to hold on for my daughter's sake." One day, Karen was invited to perform at a wedding, and a driver was supposed to pick her up. Early in the morning, she waited for him, standing outside with a suitcase of makeup and her dress bag, in which her concert dress was stored. Well, not hers exactly, another dress which Jenna allowed her to wear. The dress was gorgeous, with a full skirt and a tight-fitting bodice. A car pulled up, and the door opened, revealing a bald man with a large nose. The nose caught her eye first. "Are you going to sing?" the man asked. "Yes, I am," Karen nodded. "All right, hop in." He gestured to the back seat. She settled in, carefully folding the dresses on her knees, and half an hour later they were on a country road. The car was bouncing so much that Karen had to grab the handle hanging over the window to keep from hitting her head on the ceiling. "Please be careful, you're carrying a person," she protested. "I didn't check," the man chuckled. Karen decided to pretend she hadn't heard him. She just needed to get to her destination, preferably without a fuss, without ruining her mood before the performance. Suddenly, the car stopped. Wait here, I need to get out for 5 minutes," he turned to her and winked. "You can go too if you need to." "I don't need to," Karen turned away. "Just go about your business." He returned, adjusting his sweater. He sat in the driver's seat and inserted the key into the ignition. Nothing happened. He turned the key again. Silence. The car wouldn't start. "Well, damn it," the man cursed. "What happened?" Karen was frightened. "I can't be late." "What am I going to do? Look, the car's broken down, damn it. Can you push the car?" "What?" She was stunned. "Can you push the car or should I do it? Can you drive?" "No, I can't." Karen nervously clenched her fingers. "Then push." "But I'm afraid you won't be able to handle it." Karen initially thought he was joking, but the man looked deadly serious. There was no choice. She got out of the car and started pushing it with all her might, digging her feet into the ground. Finally, the car started moving. "Hey, wait for me," she shouted. "Jump in while it's rolling. Why are you standing there?" he retorted. By some miracle, Karen managed to jump into the back seat. Her shoes were covered in mud, and she hadn't brought any spares with her. "By the way, what's your name, singer?" the man asked. "What difference does it make to you?" she retorted. Call me whatever you want. Well, my name is Lawrence, for example. Nice to meet you. Finally, they arrived at their destination. The ceremony was being held at a small resort. The couple had rented several cottages, with a tent set up between them where tables were arranged. There was also a small stage. At last, we're here. You go over there. He gestured towards one of the cottages. Karen nodded and got out of the car, heading in the designated direction. She needed to clean her shoes and change first. Lawrence seemed extremely unpleasant to her, especially after making her push the car. After all, she was a girl. Who did he take her for? A pack animal. Finally, Karen made her way to the stage. The guests were already taking their seats. She was asked to sing the bride's mother's favorite song. She sang accompanied by a guitar, observing the guests. She loved weddings. It was nice to think that someday she would be a bride herself. Such joyful, radiant occasions, anticipating a long and happy life together. But who knew what awaited them in reality? Maybe they would celebrate a diamond anniversary hand in hand. Or perhaps they would get divorced within a year. Right now, nobody was thinking about that, just enjoying the moment and the attention. Suddenly, Karen's gaze caught a familiar face in the crowd. Christopher. He was sitting at a table with two guys, sipping champagne. Karen's voice faltered. They looked at her in surprise. She kept singing, feeling like she had no ground beneath her feet and no awareness of her body. It was a strange sensation, as if she were about to float away like a balloon. Christopher glanced briefly at her and then returned to his conversation. He pretended not to recognize her, or maybe he did and just didn't want to show it. Singing became unbearably difficult for Karen. She kept an eye on Christopher. He drank champagne, danced with two girls, then laughed at his friends' jokes, seemingly oblivious to Karen. Finally, after the newlyweds' dance, Karen asked for a short break. Gathering her courage, she approached Christopher, who had just stepped aside for a smoke. "Hey there," she smiled. "Hey," he raised an eyebrow, completely calm as if nothing had happened. "How are you?" "I'm all right," she coughed. "And you?" "Yeah, doing all right. Friends invited me to the wedding, just chilling." Well, I'm doing okay too." She waited for him to ask about the child, but Christopher just looked at Karen and smiled indifferently, as if they had once been in the same school and only interacted during breaks. "Oh, there you are." A pretty brunette girl in a pink dress approached them. She glanced at Karen, clearly displeased that Christopher was talking to her. "Oh, this is my fiancée. Meet Rita." Christopher embraced the girl by the shoulders. "And this is Karen. We met when I was doing my internship after college." Rita hugged Christopher, seemingly trying to demonstrate that she, and only she, had all the rights to him. "Nice to meet you, Karen," she said. "Christopher, come on, let's go already. I'm bored." "All right, Karen, see you." Christopher nodded reservedly. "Nice seeing you." "Fiancé?" Karen stood still, her legs seemingly rooted to the ground. He didn't care, neither about Karen nor about her child. Maybe Christopher had completely forgotten about what had once been between them. During the next break, she decided to act more boldly. Karen caught Christopher in the smoking area and whispered, "Christopher, I had a daughter from you." "So what?" He shrugged. "It's your choice. What do you want from me now? I didn't ask you to get pregnant." "What are you saying?" Karen couldn't believe her ears. "But this is..." "Don't meddle in my life." He squeezed the cigarette between his fingers so hard that it flattened. "I'm fine. Everything is as I wanted. If you mention the child to Rita, it's your own fault, got it? I'll figure out how to make sure you never see the child again. I have the means, do you understand? Now get out of here." Karen couldn't remember when she made it through the rest of the wedding. She sang on autopilot without soul. Fortunately, the drunk guests didn't notice. Christopher danced with Rita, and Karen's mind kept flashing her pink dress. Finally, she was released. Karen, not knowing what she was doing, grabbed a bottle of wine from one of the tables and drank it almost in one gulp. Her head spun, she stumbled out of the cottage and leaned against the wall. Everything was swimming before her eyes. Her legs wouldn't obey her. "So, are we going home?" Lawrence approached her. He looked at Karen in surprise. "And why did you drink so much, star of the stage?" "Just drive me home and please don't ask answers." Karen commanded. Don't ask questions, Lawrence corrected her. You're quite something. Ha ha. Hey.
He pushed her into the car and carefully fastened her seatbelt. On the way, Karen burst into tears. It seemed like she was telling Lawrence about her life. She talked about Christopher, about her daughter Valerie, about Jenna she lived with, about her parents. She cried, screamed, whimpered, and for some reason tried to hit Lawrence on the head. And then she fell asleep, slumped over the seatbelt.
Karen woke up at home with a terrible headache. She made her way to the kitchen with difficulty. Jenna was sitting at the table, feeding Valerie breakfast. Mama. Valerie raised her little arms and smiled joyfully. A drunken mother is a sorrow in the family, Jen whispered. You'll find mineral water in the fridge if you need it. That nice young man first brought you home, then mineral water and aspirin. What man? Karen sat down next to Jenna, trying not to breathe on her daughter. I don't remember anything. Oh, the handsome man who took the trouble to bring your fragile body home. Karen, what was that, huh? What was that? Valerie echoed Jenna. You see, I just met someone there at the wedding. Karen opened the mineral water and eagerly drank straight from the bottle. Her head was splitting apart. So you met him, huh? Jenna's eyes widened. Yeah, Karen nodded. I'll tell you later. Karen only managed to tell Jenna about Christopher in the evening. Valerie missed her mom and demanded attention. Karen tried not to show that she felt bad and smiled diligently at her daughter. Finally, they put the little girl to bed, and Karen told Jenna about Christopher. What a jerk, Jenna said. And how did you manage to end up in his bed? Although I wouldn't call you smart. What kind of person are you? Karen sighed. You never say anything good. What good do you expect me to say? Jenna pursed her lips. You live like a rolling stone. Only one thing turned out well for you. That's Valerie, Karen finished the sentence. I remember, and maybe more good things will come. I hope you're not talking about a second child you'll have from who knows whom. After saying this, Jenna suddenly gently stroked Karen's head. The young woman caught her hand and pressed her cheek to the dry, warm palm, closing her eyes. Thank you, Karen whispered. Oh, come on. Jenna leaned down, kissed Karen on the forehead. Just don't drink like that anymore. What kind of example are you setting for the child? By the way, Valerie asked what that smell was before bedtime. She doesn't know such words yet, Karen laughed. 3 days later, Lawrence was standing at their apartment door, in a suit. With flowers in his hands, Karen actually wanted to kick him out. Not because he had done anything wrong to her, she was just terribly ashamed of her behavior. But Jenna didn't allow Lawrence to be kicked out. Fast forward to today. Karen wasn't herself, and why did meeting Christopher affect her so much? He was nobody to her, a stranger, the father of her daughter. This connection probably could never be severed. How she hated him, and at the same time couldn't hate him. If it weren't for him, there would be nothing, neither Valerie, nor Jenna, nor Lawrence, nor Karen as she had become over the years. Valerie and Ian went on their honeymoon. Billy felt a bit upset that they didn't take her along. But Lawrence promised his daughter that next summer they would go somewhere too, maybe to the seaside or on a long hiking trip. Billy loved the idea. The only one against it was Karen herself. Taking a little girl to the mountains? What a strange idea. But Lawrence just teased his wife, repeating that Billy was already quite grown up and could handle a hike perfectly well. Karen felt restless. It was as if Christopher had touched some long-forgotten strings of her soul that she wanted to forget forever. A week after the wedding, she was home alone. Lawrence had taken Billy to the ice cream cafe. It was Friday, and such outings were their weekly ritual. Just the three of them, Valerie, Billy, and Lawrence. Karen loved this time. She could relax away from the hustle and bustle, soak in the bath, read a book. Suddenly, the phone rang. The number was unknown. Karen thought it must be some sort of advertising call, but she answered it. Karen? Yes. Hello, who is this? Silence followed on the other end. Hello, what silly jokes are these? Who is this? It's Christopher. What? She asked again. Christopher, I remembered. Long ago in a distant kingdom. You said so at the wedding, didn't you? Yes, I did, Karen replied.
Her mouth went dry, her lips inexplicably wouldn't cooperate.
What do you want? She asked. Tell me, is Valerie my daughter? No, she said. She's my husband's daughter. He raised her, she loves him. You're not needed by her or by me. Karen, wait, I would like to meet, even if just for a little while. Why? What do you want? To talk and apologize. Karen pondered. Apologize. How long she had waited for apologies from him. Many years, since Valerie was born, and it seemed she still wanted to hear those words from him. Okay, where and when? She said calmly. Can you do it tomorrow? I can, Karen agreed. At 1 o'clock at Magnolia Cafe. And without waiting for a response, she hung up. She told Lawrence about the call before bed. And what, are you going? Do you want me to come with you? He asked. Why? Karen was surprised. For example, I could punch him, Lawrence suggested. What's with the desire to punch someone in the face, dear? She looked at her husband in surprise. Is that a way to solve a problem? Well, maybe the problem won't be solved, but it's an effective way to let someone know they're wrong, the man pouted. Karen smiled gently. He was indeed amusing, a father of 2, yet sometimes he behaved like a child. But that's what she always liked about Lawrence, and also his kindness, calmness, and strength. I'll handle it myself if needed, don't worry, the woman promised. All right, he grumbled. Go if you want to. Does Valerie know? Of course not. Karen shook her head. Why? She knows about his existence, of course, but she's never expressed any desire to meet him. Her dad is you, Lawrence. You. Karen closed her eyes. Her husband wrapped his arm around her waist. They always fell asleep like this, in each other's embrace, from the very first night they spent together. Karen lay there, reminiscing about how Lawrence courted her. At first, she couldn't take him seriously because of his endless jokes and his profession. But what kind of job was a driver? Only later did she learn his story. Lawrence was the director of a furniture factory. He built it from scratch, made good furniture, was involved in all stages of production. But then his competitors burned down his factory to the ground. He had to start over from scratch. When Lawrence lost his business, he lost his wife too. She needed a well-off husband who could satisfy all her whims. Lawrence let her go and tried to forget her forever. A month after they met, Karen invited him over, and as she watched Lawrence interact with Valerie, a strange thought suddenly crossed her mind. So he's your future husband. As if someone's voice uttered these words, but only Karen heard them. Jenna liked Lawrence too. Don't miss out on him, you're a fool. If I don't tell you, nobody will. Soon they moved in together. Jenna offered to let them stay with her and rent out Lawrence's apartment. Lawrence agreed reluctantly. He understood that without Jenna's help, they would struggle to handle the little mischief-maker Valerie. The next few years became the happiest in Karen's life. Valerie was growing up, and Lawrence started his business again. This time, he ventured into freight transportation. It was tough. Sometimes there wasn't enough money, but the challenges only inspired them. They had the people they loved most in the world by their side, the closest and dearest. Jenna taught Valerie Swedish. Sometimes they would converse in Swedish in front of Karen, who didn't understand a word. Grandmother and granddaughter had their own secrets, which they didn't rush to share with Karen. By the time Valerie reached 5th grade, she spoke Swedish fluently, and they even considered sending her to a language school, but Valerie refused. She declared that she would pursue a career in fashion and nothing else. Daughter, what a thought, huh? Protested Karen. What kind of occupation is that? In general, Valerie is smarter than you, argued Jenna, who always sided with Valerie. And knowing the language will come in handy, believe me. Eventually, Karen and Lawrence got married. The wedding was modest. They simply didn't have the money for a lavish celebration. But Karen's sister Jody managed to attend and revealed that her marriage was on the verge of collapse. She dreamed of divorcing quickly and moving closer to her sister. Then Billy was born. Lawrence's biggest fear was that their daughter would inherit his nose. But fortunately, Billy had a small and neat nose. Karen found herself a new occupation. She stopped singing in restaurants but started teaching children vocals and guitar playing. She loved this job immensely. It didn't bring in much money, but it gave her a sense of purpose and fulfillment. Soon after, Jenna passed away. She was diagnosed with cancer. It was a nightmare for Karen at the time. Hospitals, chemotherapy, surgeries, nothing helped. Jenna left her apartment to Karen and her husband in her will, accompanied by a letter thanking Karen for the years they spent together and for saving her from loneliness. Karen felt like she had lost her own mother. Valerie also deeply missed the woman she considered her grandmother. A photograph of Jenna hung in Valerie's room ever since. Years flew by. Valerie grew up, met Ian, and announced she would marry him. Karen greeted this news with tears in her eyes. She was happy for her daughter, and she liked Ian. He was a good boy from a decent family, completely in love with Valerie. But letting her daughter go was terribly frightening. In his usual manner, Lawrence promised that if Ian ever hurt Valerie, he wouldn't have much time left to live. It didn't reassure Karen at all, but gradually, she came to terms with the fact that Valerie had grown up for good. And now, after many years, Christopher reappears. I wonder, does he just want to apologize to Karen? The next day, precisely at noon, Karen was at Magnolia. Christopher wasn't late. He appeared as soon as she ordered coffee. He sat across from her, nervously crumpling a napkin, gazing out the window, then meeting the woman's eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Am I making you nervous? Is everything this serious?" "Yeah, a little," he smiled, but his smile seemed forced to Karen. I've wanted to meet for a while, but didn't know how or where to find you. I've been thinking about you and the child, about the terrible sin I committed, for which God punished me." "I'm glad you realized that," Karen replied. She took a sip of coffee and grimaced. It was too bitter, although perhaps this taste was perfect for their meeting. "You don't understand." Christopher looked away. "I only understand now." And he began to tell his story. Rita, whom Karen met at that fateful wedding, was Christopher's first wife. They were together for 10 years before divorcing. Rita wanted children, but she couldn't get pregnant. Finally, Ross was born. At that time, Christopher had already met Allison, with whom he planned to date and eventually leave his wife when Ross grew up. The divorce happened when Ross turned 2. Christopher didn't want to wait any longer. His own son became a burden to him. He was irritated by his wife, who gained weight after giving birth. Allison, on the other hand, was much younger and prettier than Rita. Christopher planned to start a new life with her. Things were going well for him. He became the owner of an agency that organized weddings. Sometimes Christopher even served as a host, for a hefty fee, of course. He was considered the best in his field. But everything fell apart a year ago, he admitted. First, Allison left, taking a large part of my savings, including some of the money intended for business development. And then the worst happened. Ross was diagnosed with a disease. "What?" asked Karen. She genuinely felt sorry for Christopher. You wouldn't wish such a fate on your worst enemy. She had always feared her children getting sick. Both Valerie and Billy had never been seriously ill. But even when they started coughing and their temperature rose, Karen's heart broke into pieces. What if there were complications? What if the doctors missed something serious? In short, it's a blood cancer. Christopher closed his eyes, trying to hold back tears. When Rita wrote to me about it, I nearly lost my mind. I hadn't been in touch with my son. I abandoned him. I paid some pennies in child support and thought I didn't know anything else. And when I realized what could happen, I don't know what to do. I decided to ask you for forgiveness, maybe. Maybe God will see it and save my Ross? Oh, Christopher. Karen seemed to have forgotten her resentment. She squeezed the man's hand. Please don't lose hope. Everything will be fine.
I don't think so. Christopher shook his head. I don't know how I'll live after this, and I don't know what to do. The doctors say he needs a bone marrow donor, but they haven't found a suitable one. There's no hope left.
And show him to me, Karen asked the man softly. Christopher silently nodded and began scrolling through his phone gallery. Here, this is him. From the photo, a boy looked at Karen, a spitting image of Valerie in her childhood. Karen's heart clenched with such force that she almost screamed, whether from physical or emotional pain. Send me the photo, Karen requested, and tell me which hospital Ross is in. Why? Christopher asked, frowning. Do you want to visit him? Please, just do it. Karen softly smiled. Do you think Valerie will want to see me? He asked. I have a more important question for her, Karen sighed. They talked a little more about Ross, about Valerie, about her plans for life. Christopher suddenly looked like he aged 10 years, and Karen understood his concerns. Poor little boy, he's not at fault in any of this. They said their goodbyes. Karen went home and told Lawrence everything. He seemed to understand her plans. Do you think Valerie will agree? It's strange Christopher didn't think about it at all, Lawrence pondered. Lawrence, he's losing his mind, Karen sighed. I'll talk to our daughter, whatever she decides will be. Are you going to call her now? He asked. Yes, time waits for no one in such cases, Karen replied. Karen hugged her husband, inhaling his familiar scent. It's a shame to spoil her trip, but there's no other way, Lawrence. 2 days later, Valerie came home, excited, frightened. She asked from the threshold, Mom, when are we going to the hospital? Karen proudly thought she had raised her daughter right. Or maybe it was Jenna's doing. Fortunately, it turned out that Valerie's bone marrow was a match for the transplant. Valerie didn't hesitate for a second. I want to try to save Ross, she declared. If I don't try, Mom, I'll probably never forgive myself. Isn't that right? Yes, of course it is, dear, Karen, trying not to cry, hugged Valerie. He's such a little guy, Valerie said, and it's not his fault that our dad, well, he's not a very good person. The following weeks were agonizing with anticipation. Karen managed to bond with Rita, Ross's mother. They were together, waiting for the treatment results. Valerie was waiting too, and she even allowed to visit her brother in the hospital. 1 year later. Why did you gather us all, Mom? Valerie asked. There's no celebration, is there? You'll see, everything has its time. Lawrence ruffled her daughter's hair, messing up her carefully styled locks. You'll like it. Ian adjusted his glasses. I, for one, don't like surprises. They make me very nervous. Don't fret, Karen chuckled. Just help set the table. Physical work helps ease nervousness, Ian. Grudgingly, Ian started arranging the dishes. Okay, this is for Jody and her husband, Karen counted. This is for Ross and Rita. Now Ross wants to sit next to Billy, so she goes here. What's going on, Mom? Valerie protested. You'll find out soon, Karen winked, and here Aunt Ashley and her kids will sit probably. Finally, the table was set. The guests gathered. Ross stuck close to his sister Valerie. Karen marveled at their resemblance. Genetic twins, the doctor said. Aunt Ashley arrived. So did Karen's older sister Jody, who seemed to look better with each passing year after her divorce from Russell. The guests settled at the table. Karen looked at them thoughtfully. It's a pity her parents never forgave her. She wished to see them today, but what can you do? Sometimes pride and principles become more important than love. Karen stood up. I would like to say a lot, she began, to thank you all, to say that I love you all, that each of you means a lot to me, but I don't want long speeches. Or maybe I do, and I'll start from afar. Mom! Valerie and Billy exclaimed in unison. In short, we're having another child, Lawrence announced loudly. Karen looked at him reproachfully, but he just shrugged and smiled at his wife. Well, dear, I can't bear to see you torment the children. Karen feigned offense and sat down, crossing her arms over her chest. Everyone began congratulating them. Valerie and Billy hugged, Ross clapped his hands, and Karen looked at the photograph hanging on the wall. A photo of Jenna, the woman who once saved her life. Mentally, Karen heard her voice. I told you that you're capable